Chapter 2153. Meg looked at the bomb that had cracked open in Jonah's hand and raised his eyebrows slightly. He felt that this fellow was indeed something. Jonah studied the cannonball in his hand for a while, then looked up at Meg and asked, "Who invented this thing?" Meg pointed at himself. "You're really a talent." Jonas gave Meg a thumbs up and then put the bomb back together. He looked at the explosion array outside for a while and asked Meg, "Did you add this too?" "No, I don't know magic. This was added by someone else after strengthening and improving it. However, its stability is extremely poor and it can't meet the requirements for launch." Meg shook his head. "This is more than extremely poor. This is simply murdering one of your own." Jonas waved his hand to erase the explosion array outside the bomb and shook his head. "The stability of this array is extremely poor. Although it can effectively increase the power of the cannonball, as long as there is friction, it can easily explode and cause the bomb to explode. Whether it's storage, transportation, or launch, it can't meet the requirements. The person who added this array outside the cannonball is really an idiot." "I agree." After listening to Jonas' analysis, Meg nodded and then asked seriously, "How can it be improved?" "While increasing the power of the cannonball, it can maintain its stability, and it has a higher cost-performance ratio. It's very simple. Add another protective shell to this bomb," Jonas said with a smile. "How so?" "The explosion array is an extremely simple level 1 array. Even a level 1 magic caster can easily inscribe it. It's indeed an extremely cost-effective choice. The method to maintain its stability is actually very simple. Directly isolate the friction between it and the cannon barrel and use the cannonball to detonate the explosion array instead of letting the explosion array detonate the cannonball. Therefore, we can add another layer of iron shell outside the cannonball that has been inscribed with the explosion array and fill the interlayer with iron balls to increase its power," Jonas explained. "Brilliant." Meg's eyes lit up. The solution provided by professionals was indeed different. "Master, didn't you say that our opponents are a pile of bones? What's the point of putting iron balls in there?" Barbara interjected. "Can't you put something inside that they're afraid of?" As soon as Barbara said that, Meg and Jonas were stunned. That was right. What was the undead army afraid of? Meg suddenly realized something very important. They seemed to know too little about their opponents. Although the Roth Empire was constantly confirming the undead army's movements, they had yet to find out the undead army's weakness. Meg had personally fought against the undead army, but those skeletons could not withstand a single blow from him. However, the soldiers of the Alliance army that were about to head to the front lines did not possess his strength. In fact, they were not even as strong as the Undead Legion. Other than the heavy news that they had no life, no sense of pain, and no fear of death, the soldiers of the Alliance army knew nothing about the strong enemy they were about to face. They weren't even told how to deal with their opponents faster or how to confirm that their opponents had been dealt with. As the supreme commander of the Alliance army, Meg felt a chill run down his spine. He worked hard to bring about the birth of the Alliance army and tried to provide the Alliance army with stronger firepower and more logistical support. However, in terms of how the ordinary soldiers could kill the undead army more easily, what he did was far from enough. Perhaps we should indeed give a suggestion. He knew what he had to do next. Meg left Jonas's place and handed the solution to the hill. He returned to the Aiden Square and walked around to buy a batch of materials. Then, he went to the textile factory to find Irina, who was making arrangements for the expedition. "Why are you here?" Irina asked Meg, who was standing at the door, as she put down the materials in her hands. "I brought you supper." Meg walked in with the food box and placed it in front of Irina, with a smile. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Irina asked as she took out the fried rice inside. Meg sat down opposite her. "I intend to make another trip to the polar ice plains. You still want to kill Cthulhu alone?" Irina stopped what she was doing and looked at Meg. "No, I know I can't kill it alone." Meg shook his head. "I want to know more about those undead warriors. For example, how to kill them more easily." "You can kill them effortlessly. But the Alliance army only has me and millions of ordinary soldiers. In the Roth Empire's army, knights below 3rd tier make up more than 70% of the population." Meg shook his head. They will be sent to the front line to face the undead army. Irina was silent for a while before she looked at Meg and said, "So, what do you intend to do?" "I took some things and intend to test them on some undead warriors." "I need your help," Meg said. "Let's go." "We'll eat on the way," Irina said as she stood up and picked up the fried rice. "Why don't you eat first?" Meg was a little embarrassed. "There's plenty of time on the way." A golden light lit up under Irina's feet, and the two disappeared from the office.
"Oh, yes."
"Where are the two children?" "I just brought them back to the restaurant. They will take good care of themselves. Julian is just beside them. There won't be a problem." The purple lightning glided across the sky above the ice plains and landed slowly beside a canyon. Meg looked at the tens of thousands of skeleton soldiers standing neatly in the canyon below and frowned slightly. They had searched the ice plains for 2 hours, and this was the first batch of undead army that they had found. And the coordinates that the Roth Empire had provided 2 days ago were no longer found any traces of the undead army. These skeleton soldiers were a few meters apart and stood neatly in the canyon according to their size. Frost hung on their bodies, and they did not move at all, just like ice sculptures. "Why isn't there any movement?" Irina asked, puzzled. Meg was also a little surprised. These skeletons were standing neatly, and it was obvious that they did not exist naturally. From the surrounding traces, they should have been summoned here, but why did it seem like there was no movement at all? At this moment, in the middle of the group of skeleton soldiers, the huge eyes of the giant skeleton that was dozens of meters tall suddenly lit up. Like 2 red spotlights, they fell on the purple-striped griffin. A black sound wave was released from its body, and those skeleton soldiers seemed to have been awakened. Pairs of red eyes lit up, and the ice on their bodies fell off, revealing the eerie white bones. "Roar!" That giant skeleton let out a furious roar and pointed the ice crystal spear in its hand in the direction of Meg and the rest. Countless skeleton soldiers began to climb up the walls of the canyon and pounced towards Meg and the rest. "What do we do now?" Irina asked, tilting her head. "Let's see if the silver sword works first." Meg took out a long sword that was made of pure silver. Chapter 2154. The long sword made of pure silver shone with a silver glow under the moonlight. Meg stood with the sword in his hand and looked down at the skeleton soldiers that were climbing up the cliff quickly. Irina looked at the serious Meg and rolled her eyes. "Given your ability, even if you use a wooden sword, you'll be able to cut these fellows down like chopping vegetables. The result is not useful at all." "This is indeed a problem." Meg nodded. He kept the silver sword in his hand and took out 2 crossbows instead. These were 2 standard crossbows of the Roth Empire's army. They were engraved with the most basic enhancement spell formation. Meg held 1 crossbow in each hand. One of them was equipped with a silver arrow, while the other was equipped with a normal arrow. His gaze searched for targets among the skeletons, and he quickly chose 2 skeletons that were similar in size. They were obviously of the same race, and they were not very strong. "Help me take a picture of the experiment," Meg said to Irina, and then pressed the trigger. Swoosh! Swoosh! 2 crossbow arrows were shot out and left a mark in the air as they hit the 2 skeletons at the same time. The silver arrow landed on the skull of the skeleton and was instantly flattened. The arrow shaft hit the skull and broke inch by inch. That skeleton only swayed a little and then continued to climb up as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the other standard crossbow arrow, with a special arrowhead, was nailed on the skull of the skeleton. Although it did not penetrate, it still sent the skeleton flying backward. It fell to the bottom of the cliff and became a pile of broken bones. "Looks like a terrible improvement." Irina waved the photo stone in her hand with a smile. "Looks like pure silver won't work." Meg nodded and then took out a peachwood arrow. "Wooden arrow?" Irina was a little shocked. Elves were born archers. Almost every elf was an excellent archer. Her understanding of archery was far above Meg's. Previously, the silver arrows were unable to cause any damage to the skeletons. Now that Meg was using the wooden arrows, wasn't he being too hasty? These aren't ordinary wooden arrows. These are arrows with mahogany arrowheads. Meg aimed the crossbow at a skeleton and pulled the trigger. The peachwood arrow flew out and accurately hit the skull between its eyebrows. Surprisingly, when the seemingly fragile wooden arrow came into contact with the skeleton, the tip of the arrow actually emitted a golden light. The red light in the skeleton's eyes flickered, and a hole was melted in between its eyebrows. The wooden arrow had pierced into the skeleton's head. The skeleton seemed to have been ignited and quickly turned into a ball of golden fire. As it burned, it fell down. When it landed, it had already turned into ashes. Irina looked at this scene in surprise. The skull that the standard crossbow bolts had failed to penetrate was actually pierced through by a wooden arrow. Furthermore, a mysterious ray of light appeared and turned the skull into ashes. Ninth uncle didn't lie to me. Meg's eyes also lit up. He didn't expect the mahogany arrowhead to have such a miraculous effect. Let's see how strong a skeleton this mahogany can be. Meg took another mahogany arrow, aimed at a high-level skeleton emitting level 7 strength, and pulled the trigger. The mahogany arrow hit the skull between its eyebrows, and the golden light appeared again. However, at the same time, a dark red scale appeared between the skull's eyebrows, canceling out the golden light. The mahogany arrowhead was quickly worn out, and the rest of the arrow shaft exploded, leaving only a black mark between the skull's eyebrows. It won't work after level 7. Meg was deep in thought. The arrow was already aimed at a level 6 skeleton. The mahogany arrow pierced through the level 6 skeleton. Although it didn't directly melt into ashes like the low-level skeletons, 3 consecutive arrows could kill a level 6 skeleton. Is there a spell formation inscribed on this mahogany arrow? Irina couldn't help but ask. The crossbow bolts that could only pierce through level 3 skeletons and couldn't kill them directly were actually able to kill level 6 skeletons after the seemingly fragile mahogany arrow was replaced. This was really unbelievable. No, it's just a simple mahogany arrowhead. Meg shook his head with a smile. He took out a mahogany sword and then took out half a jar of cinnabar powder and poured half a jar of water into it. After that, he dipped the mahogany arrowhead in the cinnabar water and then reloaded the arrow and aimed at the level 7 skeleton from before.
Boom.
The cinnabar mahogany arrow hit the skeleton and made a loud sound. The skeleton that was previously unshakable had its skull blown off by this arrow, and its body was also blown into a pile of broken bones. Irina's eyes widened in shock. Mahogany and cinnabar, the magic power is boundless. Meg couldn't help but clap his hands in his heart. This was a killer weapon that could kill the enemy's mid-level combat power. He would never have thought that these things could cross time and space and actually have such an incredible effect on the Norland continent. Meg carried out a few more experiments. Mahogany and cinnabar would cause an explosion when it came into contact with the skeletons. It had a devastating effect on skeletons below the 7th tier. However, its lethality was limited to skeletons above the 8th tier. 8th tier skeletons had silvery white skeletons with mysterious dark red runes swimming around them. Mahogany and cinnabar could no longer penetrate their defenses. Meanwhile, the lethality of a normal long sword against the skeletons was significantly increased after the cinnabar was smeared on it. As for the mahogany swords, their lethality was a notch higher than the mahogany arrowheads. However, it was obviously not very practical to supply mahogany swords in a short period of time. After that, Meg tried to sprinkle glutinous rice on the skeletons. The low-tier skeletons had an obvious fear reaction, while the skeletons above the 7th tier could ignore the existence of the glutinous rice. Meg kept the remaining half-filled bag of glutinous rice and said to Irina, "All right, let's capture 100 of them and bring them back. Let's eliminate the rest before Cthulhu arrives."
All right.
Irina nodded and took out her magic caster's staff. Meg also took out the Tian-Du sword. The holy light shone over the canyon, and the flying sword slashed the skeletons. The two of them cooperated with Ozzy and went in and out of the canyon 7 times. It didn't take long for them to eliminate a large number of skeletons. Meg looked at the group of skeletons that were annihilated in the holy light and couldn't help but sigh. If it wasn't for the fact that there were too few magic casters, would he need to use Ninth Uncle's unique skill? However, They soon sensed a powerful aura rapidly approaching in this direction. Let's go. Meg grabbed Irina's waist and landed on Ozzy's back. A golden teleportation portal lit up from the mountain peak at the side. Ozzy dived into the portal and disappeared without a trace. After a breath, a huge figure appeared in the sky above the canyon. It let out a sharp roar as it looked at the skeletons that were more than half slaughtered. Meg and the rest appeared 25 kilometers away. The purple-striped griffin quickly rose into the air and flew south as fast as it could. Where did you learn those strange methods? Irina looked at Meg curiously, as if it was the first time she had met him. In her memory, he believed in the sword in his hand and never relied on external objects. However, today, Meg had shown a series of strange things that had a miraculous effect on the skeletons. I once read a book that recorded some methods to deal with zombies and undead. I used to think it was a joke, but after trying it today, I realized that it was really effective, Meg said with a smile. Chapter 2155. There's such a book? Irina was deep in thought. Indeed, it was right to read more. However, she did not know if the predecessors had left such a book behind. Did it mean that they had encountered a similar disaster? Actually, I wanted to try the holy water, but I can't seem to find it, Meg said casually. Holy water? Water of life. Or the holy water that those quacks from the Roth Empire use to cheat money? Irina asked Meg seriously.
Quacks.
Meg thought of the Pope who wanted to abduct Amy to become the Holy Lady. As the church's presence was too insignificant, he had forgotten about them. Speaking of which, they were indeed quite authentic. He wondered if their holy water was effective against the undead army. As for the water of life, he could test it out when he returned to Chaos City. However, compared to a cheap or like cinnabar, the water of life could save lives on the battlefield. It was too extravagant to use it against the skeletons. Let's go back and try the water of life. If it doesn't have a strong effect on the high-tier skeletons, we'd better save it for saving lives, Meg said. The purple-striped griffin flew into Chaos City and landed in the city, Lord's Castle. Michael watched the image in the photostone. When he saw the peachwood arrows, which were dyed with cinnabar, explode the skeletons, he was stunned. Alex, you're really a genius. Michael looked at Meg in awe. He knew very well what this meant. The Alliance army had a high proportion of low-tier warriors, and their destructive power against the undead army would be increased by several folds. I'm going to gather the various representatives now and get them to supply as much peachwood and cinnabar as possible. At the same time, collect enough glutinous rice to send to the front line, Meg said. All right. I'll send someone to arrange for the various contacts to come to the meeting room. Michael nodded. Given the scale of the Alliance army, this was indeed not a workload that Chaos City could handle. Very soon, the contacts that the various races had left in Chaos City arrived at the meeting room. Meg, as the commander-in-chief of the Allied army, after demonstrating the destructive power of peach wood and cinnabar against the skeletons, ordered the various races to try their best to find peach wood to make arrowheads and weapons, as well as to dig up cinnabar and grind it into powder to equip the soldiers. I know of a peach blossom island in the Endless Sea realm. The island is full of peach blossom trees, Camilla, who was the liaison of the demon clan, said. Meg's eyes lit up as he asked, how big is the island? Camilla thought for a moment and said, enough to equip 100,000 evil demons. Very good. The evil demon army's weapons will be upgraded by you all. Meg nodded. It was a good thing that they could get rid of the weapons of the 100,000 Alliance army in one go. Jinx said, if I remember correctly, there is also a huge peach mountain under Dragon Island. If you need peachwood, that would be a good source of wood. Can you confirm the location? How big is it exactly? Meg asked Jinx. Jinx pondered for a moment and said, to the east of Golden Dragon Island. I'm not sure of the exact location, but that peach mountain is very big. There are a few mountain ranges, so it won't be difficult to find it. Meg nodded and ordered, all right. Go and confirm the location and scale immediately. After reporting back, I will immediately send the logging team to cut down the peach trees.
All right.
Jinx left with the order, and quickly transformed into a golden dragon and disappeared from the sky above the city lord's castle. It might not be easy to find a huge peach mountain, but there will definitely be plenty of peach trees. You all have to try your best to collect more peach wood and make it into weapons for the soldiers. Meg paused for a moment and said to the liaison officers, "Sometimes, the people will become your greatest wealth. If they can hand over the peach trees in their yards, I think there will be a surplus of peach wood." The Roth Empire's liaison officers' eyes lit up. It was indeed not easy to find a huge patch of peach trees, but many people in Rodu had peach trees in their yards. "We, the goblins, can speed up the mining of the cinnabar ores, but the transportation and grinding of the cinnabar ores into powder have to be done by the various races themselves," the goblin liaison officer said. "No problem." Meg nodded. The goblins' mission was also very important at the moment. However, cinnabar ores were not an important ore. Other than the goblins, it was not very realistic for the various races to mine them themselves. One more thing. We need a large amount of glutinous rice. Although it has no effect on the high-tier skeletons, it can suppress the low-tier skeletons and effectively disintegrate the undead army's charge on the battlefield, Meg continued as his gaze landed on the Roth Empire's liaison officer. On the Norland continent, other than the farmers in Chaos City, who grew a small amount of glutinous rice, only the Roth Empire could provide a large amount of glutinous rice. "I will relay your order back. The Roth Empire will definitely do their best to prepare the supplies," the liaison officer said seriously. Meg nodded, and then said seriously, "Lastly, the various races' allied forces have to hurry up and gather in the north. The undead army's whereabouts are unknown, but they are not far from the edge of the ice plains. If the various races can't reach the front line in time, they will be punished for delaying the military."
Yes.
The various liaison officers' expressions froze. The impromptu meeting ended, and the various liaison officers hurriedly sent the news back to their respective races. Meanwhile, Meg and Irina went to the Grey Temple's training field. "These fellows don't look easy to deal with," Sean gasped as he looked at the 100-odd skeletons that were tied up like dumplings that Irina released from her space ring. These skeletons were of different sizes and came from different races. He couldn't tell what race many of them were from. They should belong to the ancient races that had gone extinct. And these skeletons also varied in strength. There were low-tier skeletons that were as small as monkeys, and high-tier skeletons that were as large as giant dragons. The scene that he saw earlier was verified by these 100-odd skeletons. Sean felt his scalp tingle when he thought of the million-odd skeletons in the north preparing to invade the Norland continent in the south. If Alex and Irina hadn't discovered it in advance and warned them in time, giving them time to form the allied forces, the consequences would have been unimaginable. "There aren't many of them. Leave them here for the Grey Temple to practice and test. I'll leave it to you to provide first-hand information to the allied forces," Meg said to Sean. In terms of intelligence gathering and experiment rigor, Mag could not compare to the Grey Temple. Such professional matters, naturally, had to be left to the professionals. However, before that, I have to do an experiment. Meg took out a crossbow and loaded a normal arrow. He took out a bottle of life water and poured 2 drops on the arrow tip. Then he aimed at a 7th-tier skeleton and pulled the trigger. The arrow hit the skeleton's head, but only left a shallow mark. The life water didn't give it any enhancement. Indeed, this holy water is not the holy water. Meg shook his head and kept the life water. Chapter 2156. After handing the skeletons over to Sean, Meg and Irina returned to the restaurant. Meg went upstairs to take a look at the 2 children. In the room that was still lit up, Amy was lying on the bed with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and was asleep at the desk with a paintbrush in her hand. This child. Meg took away the paintbrush from Anne's hand carefully and then carried her to the bed and covered her with the blanket. If they were on Earth, Anne would definitely be a straight-A student, a typical child from another family. Meg stood by the bed and watched the 2 children in a daze for a while. He tucked Amy in the corner of the blanket that was kicked away, turned off the lights, and left the room softly. "When do you plan to leave?" Irina asked as she stood outside the door and watched Meg close the door softly. Tomorrow, Meg said with certainty. Where are the children? I plan to ask Mia and Cece to take care of them for a few days. Irina nodded with a smile and said, Want a drink?
Sure.
I'll take a shower and go make 2 dishes. Meg nodded. Simple dishes with the best wine. That night, Meg worked very hard for a second child. The news from Chaos City reached all the races very quickly. Rodu, the royal palace, Andre, and the officials who were summoned to the royal palace were all shocked when they saw the image on the photo stone. Your Majesty, according to the report from our spies, our crossbows can only cause damage to 3rd-tier skeletons, but it's very difficult to kill the skeletons. I didn't expect that after changing the mahogany arrowheads and cinnabar, the lethality would multiply, a military official said agitatedly. The spies that were sent to the icy plains of the extreme north had come into contact with the skeleton army a few times. According to the information that was sent back, the Roth Empire's army would be completely at a disadvantage if they were to go head-to-head with the undead army's leader with their current equipment. The ministers could not hide their joy. They did not expect that when everyone was at a loss, Alex would provide such crucial information. Andre ordered in a deep voice, Peach wood and cinnabar are the most important strategic resources. Immediately draft an urgent decree and send it to the entire country, requesting all regions to cut down all peach wood and transport it to the nearest arsenal to make peachwood arrowheads to replace the original crossbow arrowheads. Seize all the cinnabar stones in the market and in the stores of various places. If anyone disobeys or hides them, punish them according to the crime of treason. They will also be transported to the munitions factory along with the peach wood swords to the front lines. Also, collect all the glutinous rice in the empire by exchanging 1 rice for 1 glutinous rice. Those who keep it will be punished for treason. Yes. A civil official bowed in acknowledgement and immediately drafted an urgent decree. After presenting it to Andre for confirmation and stamping, it was immediately sent to the various provinces. That night, the guards of Rodu began to cut down the peach trees one by one, starting from the southern part of the city. Regardless of whether they were commoners or nobles, they would read the king's decree directly. If there was any resistance, they would be arrested and imprisoned for treason. When the news spread in the morning, all the households that had peach trees took the initiative to cut them down and place them at the door, waiting for the guards to come and take them away. The guards also directly entered the orchards outside the city. The farm owner had a bitter expression, but he could only ask the farmers to help him cut down the peach trees. In a day's time, the peach wood collected was piled up into a mountain in the arsenal in the north of the city. The task of exchanging for glutinous rice was distributed to the grassroots officials. The granaries of various places were opened, and the glutinous rice exchanged for was all transported to the north. Under the heavy punishment, no one dared to hide it. In the twilight forest, Connie and the various chiefs finished watching the images on the image recording stone. Do we have peach trees in the twilight forest? Connie asked the orcs. The orcs also had a considerable number of archers. If they could equip peach wood arrowheads, their lethality would definitely be increased effectively. The chiefs all shook their heads, indicating that they didn't have any peach trees in their tribes. Connie pondered for a while and said, Send 5,000 orcs who are good at logging to the dragon territory immediately. Since we don't have any peach trees in the twilight forest, we will be responsible for cutting down trees and obtaining a portion of the peach wood. Send another 1,000 orcs to Vic Mountain to bring back the cinnabar stones we need. Great Chief, the number of peach trees in the dragon territory has not been calculated yet, and we have not been invited to cut down trees. Would it be a bad idea to go now? One of the chiefs asked hesitantly. The other chiefs all nodded in agreement, thinking that this decision was too hasty. However, Connie shook her head and said, Don't forget that Jinx is a golden dragon. For a dragon to use many to describe a peach mountain, it must be a forest. As for the dragon's invitation, I will discuss it with the commander and the dragon tribe. Her expression became serious, and she said, We have to ensure that the orc warriors can use the weapons we made before the battle, and not wait for others to give us the rest of the weapons. With such a short preparation time, no one can take care of a million-strong army. We don't have to ask for help. We have to rely on ourselves. Yes. The chiefs all agreed solemnly, and each went out to make arrangements. That night, thousands of flying mounts took off from the Wind Forest and flew in the direction of Dragon Island and Vic Mountain. The Wind Forest Star Cave abode. We don't have enough peach wood in the forest. Send 2,000 wood-cutting elves and 3,000 elves who are in charge of making crossbows to the Dragon Island's Peach Blossom Forest. Cut down trees on the spot, make bows, and transport them back to the forest. Send another 1,000 elves south to Vic Mountain and transport the cinnabar stones we need back, Helena ordered. Yes. Some elves left to carry out the order. Soon, teams of elves set off from the Wind Forest and headed to 2 destinations. In the boundless sea realm, the isolated Peach Blossom Island, which almost no one visited on a normal day, was visited by the 10 demon tribes at the same time tonight. Large ships docked at the shore, and the various tribes looked at each other, but no one made a move. Dracula flapped his wings slowly and floated in midair with a smile. In our boundless sea realm, this island has the most peach trees. Camilla has already promised Alex that we, the demons, will have to supply our own peach trees. Hence, this patch of peach trees belongs to every participating demon. Don't think about it, and distribute it according to the number of participating demons. The powerhouses of the various tribes agreed to Dracula's plan after pondering for a while. Overnight, all the tribes of the Norland continent responded to the call and tried their best to increase their combat power and self-defense ability before the war started. The miraculous effects of the peach wood and cinnabar greatly increased the allied army's morale. At the same time, it also allowed the various tribes to have a rough estimate of the undead army's strength. They were more confident and were less fearful. The next morning, Meg woke up energetically and made a scrumptious breakfast. Amy and Father wants to discuss something with the two of you, Meg said with a smile as he looked at the two of them eating breakfast. End of chapter. Chapter 2157. What's the matter? Amy asked as she sucked on her soup dumpling, and also put down her chopsticks and looked at Meg. Meg looked at Irina and smiled. Your mother and I will be going out for a while. During this time, I will ask Sister Mia and Sister Cece to take care of you. Is that okay? Are you going to save the world too? Amy looked up suddenly, her eyes filled with anticipation and panic. Yes. When the world needs us, it's time for us to step up and save it. Meg nodded with a smile.
What about me?
I'm super powerful now. Can I go and save the world too? Amy asked expectantly. I can't do it now. I'm still too young. I can only do it when I grow up. How old do I have to be considered an adult? Amy asked. You have to wait until you're 18 years old. You can make your own decisions then because you'll be an adult by then. Meg smiled and reached out to pat the little girl's head. Her soft golden hair was still as smooth as a kitten's. 18 years old? Amy asked thoughtfully. When will you be back? And asked with sign language, her clear eyes filled with worry. We'll be back when Anne finishes drawing Miss Black Cat. Meg looked at Anne and said. He saw Anne's first draft of Miss Black Cat last night. It looked pretty good. If Miss Vicky saw it, she would probably like it. And nodded obediently with a reassuring smile on her face. She signaled that she would take good care of Amy. Wear these 2 small stones on your body. No matter what, don't take them off. Do you understand? Irina took out 2 thumb-sized blue crystal necklaces and hung them around Amy's and Anne's necks. What is this? Amy touched the warm crystal. This is a protective talisman. It will protect you when we're not around. Irina looked at Amy lovingly, feeling a little guilty. Ever since Amy was born, she had spent very little time with her. Even during this period of time, she had been busy with the Night Elves' affairs and hadn't given Amy enough time. The little girl was always so obedient and sensible. She would never take the initiative to ask for anything. It was precisely because of this that it was even more heartbreaking. Once this matter was over, she would definitely stay by her side and accompany her as she grew up. Oh, what a beautiful brew. Amy retracted her gaze and looked at Meg and Irina with a serious expression on her face. Then you must come back soon. Go home after you're done with the bad guys. Amy and sister and are still waiting for you to come back for dinner. Okay. Amy and are the most obedient. Meg felt a lump in his throat and nodded with a smile. After breakfast, Meg took 2 Ruggiamos and a basket of soup dumplings to the magic potion shop next door. The door of the potion shop was open. When Meg entered, Cece, whose belly was showing, was packing Lulu's luggage. Are you going out? Meg asked in surprise when he saw Lulu's bulging luggage and the big hammer at the side. I'm going to forge, Lulu said with a simple and honest smile. Mr. Mac. Cece greeted Meg and packed the luggage before continuing. I saw the City Lord's castle's order. Lulu is planning to join the arsenal in Chaos City with Master Mabai. We might have to make a trip to the north. Lulu, let's go. Mabai's energetic voice sounded from outside the door. He poked his head in and was surprised to see Meg. Mr. Mac? You're back. Yes, I just came back. Meg nodded, looking at Mabai, who was carrying a simple luggage bag and a heavy hammer, and Lulu, who had left his pregnant wife behind to report to the arsenal. Meg couldn't help but feel a little touched. What a pity. Looks like I'll have to wait until I'm done with my work before I can eat your rainbow fried rice, Meg said with a hearty smile. Don't worry about waiting. When you come back, you'll have as much fried rice as you want. Meg nodded with a smile. Lulu looked at Cece and patted her head reluctantly. Then, she bent down and kissed her belly gently. Be careful. The baby and I will wait for you to come back. Cece stood on her tiptoes and reached out to touch his face as she whispered. Lulu nodded with a silly smile and said, Then I'll go first. Okay, don't worry. I'll take good care of myself. Cece nodded. Lulu carried the heavy hammer on her shoulder and walked out with the luggage bag in one hand. Then she said to Meg, Mr. Mac, goodbye. Mag took out 2 Ruggiamos and gave them to Mabai and Lulu. There's no wine to accompany you on your journey. I only have 2 Ruggiamos.
Take care.
Mag took out the Ruggiamos and gave them to Mabai and Lulu. Drinking will spoil things. Ruggiamos are enough, Mabai said with a hearty smile. He took a bite of the Ruggiamo and nodded with satisfaction. This is much better than wine. Let's go. Thank you, Lulu said. Then, she looked at Cece and quickly followed Mabai. The 2 of them, one tall and one short, walked away in the morning sun with their equally heavy hammers and Ruggiamos in their mouths. Cece pursed her lips and looked at Lulu's back. Finally, a line of clear tears flowed down her face. This is the breakfast I brought for you. Mag passed the soup dumplings in his hand and a handkerchief to her. Thank you. Cece turned away to wipe the tears off her face. She smiled as she took the dumplings from Meg. Then, she looked at Meg in surprise. Why did Mr. Mac suddenly bring us breakfast? They were good neighbors and often brought breakfast for her master. However, this was the first time that Meg had brought breakfast to them personally. It's cold outside. Don't catch a cold. Come in and eat while we talk, Meg said with a smile as he looked at Cece's protruding belly. Okay. Cece took the dumplings and walked into the medicine shop. I want you and Mia to take care of the kids for a few days. I'm going out. Meg sat down across from Cece and got straight to the point. Cece looked at Meg in surprise. Are you going somewhere far away? The world is not peaceful these days. Where are you going, Mr. Mac? Even Lulu can leave her pregnant wife to go to the factory at the front line. Although I'm not good at anything, my cooking skills are not bad. If I can go to the front line and cook for the soldiers, I'll do my best, Meg said with a smile. Well, Cece was stunned. She looked at Meg's determined eyes with respect. She nodded and said, Okay, Mr. Mac, don't worry. Leave the kids to us. Thank you. Mag nodded with a smile. He got up, took out a bunch of keys, and placed them on the table. If anything happens, you must hide in the restaurant with the children. I asked Princess Irina to set up a few spell formations. The restaurant should be the safest place in Chaos City. Chapter 2158. After leaving the magic potion shop, Meg went to the ice cream shop. As the shop manager, Mia was already preparing for the opening of the shop early in the morning. As Mamie's hadn't been open recently, the number of customers in the ice cream shop had increased significantly. Many of the regulars who came to ask when the restaurant would reopen would order an ice cream to soothe their stomachs. Mia was already very used to her identity as the shop manager of the ice cream shop. It was just that Gina hadn't been helping in the shop recently, so it wasn't so easy to deal with the crying children. Fortunately, she had prepared enough toys and a plan to at least ensure that the order in the shop wouldn't be disrupted by the crying children.
Ding.
The bell hanging on the door rang when the door was opened. "We're not open for business yet, customer." "Boss?" Mia was a little surprised to see the person who came in. "You haven't had breakfast yet, right? I brought some for you." Meg placed the lunchbox in his hand on the table and closed the door. "They haven't woken up yet. I came down to do some preparation work." Mia put down the things in her hand and sat at the table with a smile. She opened the lunchbox, and her eyes lit up. "It's soup dumplings." "Yeah, eat them while they're hot." "They'll wait until they wake up," Meg said with a smile. "Then I won't stand on ceremony." Mia took out a basket of soup dumplings and closed the lunchbox again to prevent the rest of the dumplings from getting cold. Meg sat opposite her and smiled as he watched Mia sipping the soup dumplings. Compared to when she passed out at the entrance of the restaurant due to hunger, Mia's complexion was rosy now, and her skin was delicate. Although this girl wasn't growing much, her growth didn't seem to be stopping. Looking at the bulging maid uniform, it didn't seem to fit her anymore. Looking at Mia eating the dumplings with a satisfied expression, Meg felt a sense of accomplishment. He wanted to remind the public not to throw away the little dragon girl he had picked up. She would become a dragon maid after a while. Burp. Mia held the shallow plate and licked the soup. She covered her mouth and burped with a satisfied expression. "Thank you for your hospitality." Mia stood up and bowed to Meg. Her twin ponytails swayed, and she was full of vigor. In this world, there was nothing more blissful than eating breakfast made by the boss after waking up. If there was, it must be the lunch and supper made by the boss. "You're welcome." Meg nodded with a smile. Mia sat down again, looked at Meg, and said, "By the way, boss, I heard that the outside world is very chaotic right now, and there are demons coming to invade us. If you don't go far away, do you want to reopen the restaurant?" "I'm here today to ask you for a favor," Meg said. "What is it?" Mia looked at Meg. Her boss had never asked her for anything. He had always been the one taking care of them and satisfying all their needs. "I'm going to go far away for a few days, so I want you and Cece to help take care of Amy and for a few days," Meg said. Mia looked a little nervous and said, "But it's so dangerous out there now. Babla had solemnly warned them not to leave Chaos City 2 days ago, and the customers who came to the shop during the past 2 days had often mentioned the conscription order from the city lord's castle. Everyone was in a state of panic, and the boss was going to go on a long journey now."
"Yes."
"I'm going up north with Chaos City's army to cook for the soldiers at the front line." Meg smiled and said, "It's dangerous at the front line. Everyone who volunteered to be conscripted knows that. I can't do much, but as a man, I should stand at the front line to protect all of you." "Boss." Mia looked at Meg with reddened eyes. She wanted to persuade him to stay, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. "Don't worry. I'm just going to cook. I don't have to go to the front line to fight with the demons. I'll be back when the war is over." Meg stroked Mia's head with a smile. He knew this lass was worried. "Besides, you know I'm not an ordinary chef. I can protect myself. I'll definitely come back safely." You can definitely do it." Mia looked at Meg and nodded seriously. "I'll take good care of Amy and Anne. Then I won't say goodbye to everyone one by one. Help me tell them that they don't have to worry." Mag stood up and prepared to leave.
"Wait."
Mia called out to Meg. She took off the golden dragon scale pendant that she had hidden in her clothes and passed it to Meg. "Master left this for me, but I don't have any use for it."
"Boss, keep it with you."
Meg looked at the glistening golden dragon scale in Mia's hand. Lewis had left it for Mia to protect herself. It was a giant dragon reverse scale that could withstand a 10th-tier powerhouse's attack. It was extremely precious. But this lass wanted to give it to him without even thinking. Don't worry. I don't need it either. Meg shook his head with a smile. Besides, if I bring it to the front line, I'm afraid your master will sniff it out and chop me up. Mia snickered as if she could already imagine that scene. Meg stopped smiling and seriously reminded Mia, take care of yourself. Also, if there's any danger, you must hide in the restaurant. That's the safest place in Chaos City. All right, Mia agreed. Meg nodded and turned to walk towards the door. Boss, you must come back safely. Mia took a step forward and looked at Meg's back. We're all waiting for you to come back.
All right.
Meg waved with a smile and left without looking back. Not long later, Angela pushed the door open and entered while rubbing her sleepy eyes. She looked at the dazed Mia and curiously asked, I think I saw Boss leave the shop when I went downstairs just now. What's he doing here? Then, her gaze was quickly attracted by the food box on the table. She opened the lid, and her eyes lit up when she saw the piping hot soup dumplings inside.
Wow.
Boss is here to give us warmth early in the morning. That's great. Smells so good. It's the smell of meat dumplings. Hannah followed her in, and her eyes lit up as well. She quickly went forward. Meg returned to the restaurant and sent the two children to the magic potion shop. Julian was no longer in the potion shop. According to Cece, he had already left yesterday to go with Crassus. Meg squatted down and looked at Amy, whose eyes were red, as he said, Be good. Daddy will be back soon. You can go and play with your friends when you're bored, but you must come home on time. Amy is very brave. I won't cry. Amy nodded.
Meow.
Ugly Duckling jumped down from Amy's arms and rubbed its head against Meg's hand. Good girl. Meg hugged Amy with a smile, and then got up to hug and Meg looked at Cece and said, Then, I'll have to trouble you.
Don't worry.
I'll take good care of them. Cece hugged the two children and nodded with a smile. Chapter 2159. As the Roth Empire headed north, the weather became colder and colder. The ice and snow showed no signs of melting, and the mountains and rivers were all white. A mountain range ran through the northern border, blocking the cold from the ice plains of the extreme north and leaving behind an environment suitable for humans to live in. This mountain range that stretched for hundreds of miles was called the Gus Mountain Range. It ran from east to west like a natural moat, protecting the northern border of the Roth Empire. After crossing the Gus Mountain Range, it was the ice plains that never melted. The ice layer could reach up to 1,000 meters thick. It was said that if one kept going north, they would enter the land of eternal night. No one knew what was buried there. This ice plains of the extreme north was a forbidden zone for all living creatures. The bone-chilling cold would quickly take away one's body temperature. Even if one did not move, one's energy would be depleted quickly. Even the snow rabbits and snow foxes that were commonly seen in the northern border were hard to find on the ice plains. The Gus Mountain Range blocked the cold wind and also isolated the existence of life. However, at this moment, on the side of the Gus Mountain Range that was close to the ice plains, there was a team of 1,000 engineers working under a cliff. The cliff on the side of the ice plains was covered with a thick layer of ice. Under the grinding of the cold wind, it was as smooth as a mirror. The cliff was hundreds of meters high and was a purely natural city wall. However, it was a mountain range after all. There would always be gaps of various sizes in between. The elites of the various armies of the Roth Empire were gathering in the northern border, while the engineers of the Northern Border Army had been deployed to the Gus Mountain Range 3 days ago to build fortifications. The Gus Mountain Range was the only choice to stop the undead army from going south. The ice plains of the extreme north were vast, and the weather was extreme. It was unrealistic to take the initiative to search for the undead army in the vast ice plains. After passing the Gus Mountain Range, there would be no more natural barriers that could stop the undead army. Using the natural barriers of the Gus Mountain Range to build fortifications, The entire mountain range would become a great wall that could stop the undead army from going south. The final battle would take place outside the Empire's borders. This was the policy set by the Allied Army's commander, Lord Alex, and Marshal Dominic. None of the warriors of the Roth Empire would question their decision. Move faster. We will fill up these few holes today and then spread glutinous rice over this area. We will roast meat for you tonight. The brothers on sentry duty just caught a few snow deer. A tall and fat knight said loudly to the engineers who were working. All right. Hearing that there would be meat to eat at night, the eyes of the engineers who were carrying the ice cubes immediately lit up, and they worked much faster. This was a gap that was more than 10 meters wide. From this gap, there was a slope covered by a layer of ice. For ordinary people, it was still an insurmountable moat. However, according to the report of the scouts who entered the ice field, the skeletons could easily climb up any slope, let alone a gentle slope like this. Therefore, they had to use the ice extracted from the ice field to block the gap and connect it with the vertical cliffs on both sides to form a complete wall. This was also what the tens of thousands of engineers working under the Gus Mountain Range were doing. Of course, it would take at least 10 days to half a month for these engineers to fill in the gap. Fortunately, there were more than 10 mages in their team. The wind mages were responsible for cutting the ice, while the water mages poured water into the cracks in the ice. After the ice solidified, it became a solid ice wall. The ice mages were like fish in water in such an icy environment. Their ice-making speed was extremely fast, and they took on a large part of the workload. Sir, we have filled a few big holes in a row. How much more do we need to fill? An engineer asked the tall and fat leader as he threw down a large piece of ice. Yeah, it's too cold. Moving ice cubes every day, my hands are frozen stiff. The other engineers also turned their heads to look at him. It was fine if they were tired these days, but this side of the mountain was not as cold as the other side of the mountain. They were used to staying in the north, and they were also unbearably cold. At night, they huddled together before the fire to barely sleep. Last night, a soldier came out of the tent to pee and fell. When he was found in the morning, he had already turned into a popsicle. How much? The tall and fat soldier smiled. Suddenly, his expression turned cold. He looked at the engineers and said, "Until you fill it up. If you don't get the order to retreat, you have to keep filling it up. Are you afraid just because it's a little cold?" The brothers who are going to the front line to fight against the undead are going to have their heads tied to their belts. Remember, although we have never fought a war in the north, you are still soldiers. If the undead army crosses the Gus Mountain Range, your families will die at the hands of those devils. All the engineers lowered their heads in shame. The engineer who asked the question earlier quietly picked up a large piece of ice and walked toward the ice wall. The engineers worked in silence. Their legs were even faster than before. On the mountain, Dominic, who was wearing armor, nodded slightly. He withdrew his gaze and looked at the adjutant beside him. Tell the engineers to hurry up and send them to the front line. Prioritize the supply of food. The front line must be set up according to the requirements within 3 days. Yes, Marshal. The adjutant nodded. After hesitating for a moment, he said, Marshal, there is another small matter that I would like to report to you.
Speak.
A frost dragon appeared on the front line yesterday. She helped the army repair more than 10 gaps, but she has been asking about the undead army, the adjutant said. Could it be her? Dominic frowned. Where is she now? I don't know if she is left. I will go and ask now, the adjutant quickly said, and left quickly. Not long later, the adjutant returned. He looked at Dominic and said, Marshal, she has left. I heard she flew toward the ice plains. She entered the ice plains? Dominic's face darkened. The Roth Empire had lost many spies in the ice plains. Whether it was the extremely dangerous environment or the skeletons hidden under the snow, they were all extremely dangerous existences.
Get ready.
I am going to write a letter to the dragons, Dominic said.
Yes.
If the million-strong undead army is a flood, then the 100-mile mountain range is the first line of defense. However, it is impossible to block the flood. Such a strong surge will definitely overturn the flood and cause it to be uncontrollable. Therefore, I have left 3 spillways. These 3 spillways are 3 natural canyons that are 10 to 15 kilometers long. Then, at the end of the spillway, I will pull up the last sluice to ensure that not a single drop of water will escape. Meg sat on the griffin's back and looked down at the vast world of ice and snow below. The Gus Mountain Range was like a huge flood, blocking the cold air that was trying to go south. What if we can't stop it? Irina asked. There are no ifs. Meg shook his head. With a deep gaze, he said, we can only guarantee that no accidents will happen. Chapter 2160. After making arrangements for the 2 children, Meg and Irina headed north to the northern region again. However, unlike the previous times, they did not cross the Gus Mountain Range this time. Meg asked Ozzy to fly lower and fly over the 3 canyons. Numerous engineers were busy in the canyons like ants. They needed to fix the 2 cliffs neatly to prevent the skeletons from climbing up easily. They also needed to dig tunnels that were several meters tall in the middle of the canyons. There were also a considerable number of magicians in the canyons who were carving formations on the cliffs and the ground. These 3 10-mile-long canyons would become the meat grinders of this war. Meg would place a large number of troops on both sides of the canyons to kill as many undead creatures as possible before they reached the entrance of the canyons. This would reduce the pressure on the warriors guarding the entrance. Although there are many engineers, their efficiency is too low. We need elites with special abilities from the various races to help, Meg said with a frown. The abilities of the northern region's engineers were limited, and not enough to meet his requirements. When the night elves arrive, they can join the carving formation team. There are more than 1,000 magicians, Irina said. Not enough. Meg pointed at the ice field in front of them. If possible, I hope to kill them as much as possible before they reach the Gus Mountain Range to reduce our losses. Our time is limited, Irina reminded. I was greedy. Meg looked away and asked Ozzy to descend. The temporary command center of the Allied army was set up in the middle of the battlefront, facing the canyon in the middle. On a platform at the top of the mountain, a few temporary halls made of ice were built. The sparkling ice shone under the sun and looked like a dreamy ice castle. The ice that did not melt all year round in the northern region was inexhaustible. It was the best building material. They only needed to carve a few simple formations inside to block the coldness of the ice itself and the influence of internal activities on the ice. The purple-striped griffin landed on the platform in front of the hall. After a brief panic, the guards recognized Meg and quickly bowed respectfully. Is Marshal Dominic in the camp? Meg asked as he jumped down from the griffin and quickly approached an officer. The marshal is in the camp. Sir, please follow me. The officer replied respectfully and led the way for Meg and Irina. There were no splendid decorations in the Frost Palace. Like the Ministry of War, it was divided into many areas, where civil and military officials were busy dealing with matters. At the moment, the Allied army had yet to arrive at the front lines. The frontline camp was still dominated by the Imperial Army led by Dominica. The officer led Meg and Irina to a meeting room in the depths of the hall. The spacious meeting room still did not have any extra decorations. The round table was arranged around a huge sand table. The sand table was a replica of the terrain of the front line of the Roth Mountain Range, including the 3 canyons. Dominic was writing something on the table when he heard the commotion. He stood up and looked at Meg. You're here?
Yes.
Meg nodded. He looked at the sand table and then at Dominic. The front line is more difficult than I thought. A smile appeared on Dominic's wrinkled face. If the engineers at the front line could hear this, they would be very comforted. The engineers are unable to complete the frontline fortifications in a short time. There are many things they can't do. Ask the magic casters from the Magus Tower to come to the front line immediately, Meg said to Dominic. I also want to ask the Frost Dragons to help mend the gap in the Gus Mountain Range. Some of the gaps are too big. The engineers and magic casters are unable to fill them in short time, Dominic said. I will order all the races to come and help immediately. The frontline fortifications are the key to this war. We have to finish them as soon as possible. Meg nodded. He had thought about this on the way here. All the races were gathering their elites, but such a large army would need a lot of time even if they were given the green light to go north. At times like this, Meg thought of the benefits of large-scale teleportation portals. It was a pity that the cost of setting up and using teleportation portals was very high, not to mention a large-scale teleportation portal that required more than 10,000 people. All the races on the Norland continent couldn't afford it at all. However, the frontline fortifications needed people with special abilities. For example, powerful ice magic casters and powerhouses with ice abilities could speed up the speed of repairing the gaps. There were also spell formation masters. Every spell formation added in the canyon could reduce the pressure on the warriors at the back. It was very beneficial to set it up early. Dominic nodded. He had the same idea as him. However, his status wasn't enough to mobilize all the races. It was naturally best that Alex could take the initiative to suggest it.
Oh, yes. There's something else that you might be interested in, Dominic said.
Yesterday, a frost dragon visited the front line and helped to mend more than 10 gaps. She also asked about the undead army and left early in the morning to enter the ice plains. Elizabeth's? Meg asked Dominic. From the descriptions of the warriors at the front line, it could be her. Dominic nodded. Where exactly did she enter the ice plains? Meg asked with a serious expression. You want to enter the ice plains to look for her? Dominic looked at Meg in shock. She's very important. Meg nodded and added, she might be a trump card against Rankster. After searching for so many days, this was the first time Meg heard news about Elizabeth. The bad news was that she had entered the ice plains, and she had entered in the morning. I'll get the soldiers who saw her leave in the morning to come over, Dominic said. No need. Just get someone to bring me there. I'm afraid it'll be different if we go to another place. Meg shook his head. All right. Dominic called his adjutant over and asked him to bring Meg and the others to find the soldiers who had seen Elizabeth. Irina also followed beside Meg with a serious expression. Danger lurked everywhere in the ice plains. Both Cthulhu and Josh were extremely dangerous. Moreover, even if she found Rankster had already lost his mind and was even more dangerous. Soon, Meg saw the engineers who had encountered the frost dragon. From their description, Meg could confirm that it was Elizabeth who had disappeared for a long time. Sir, she flew in this direction. I'm sure, a tall and thin engineer said as he pointed at the white ice plains. Did she say where she was going before she left? Meg asked.
No.
She didn't speak much. She only asked a few questions about the undead army, but we didn't know anything, so we didn't give her any information. The soldier shook his head. All right. Meg nodded. He turned to the adjutant who had brought them here and said, Tell the marshal that I need to enter the ice plains. Let him write the letter. Chapter 2161. The purple-striped griffin took off, turned into a purple lightning, and flew towards the depths of the ice field. The engineers all stopped what they were doing and looked at this scene in shock. Lord Alex, that godlike man. He actually went straight into the ice field. Lord went in just like that. Will anything happen? An engineer asked worriedly. That's Lord Alex. He was the one who warned us about the demons and the undead army. How could anything happen to him? Yes. With Lord's ability, it's not a problem for him to go in and out of the ice field 7 times. And that beautiful lady just now should be Princess Irina, right? She's also a legendary powerhouse. The engineers discussed softly and were rather excited. Hurry up and get to work, the officer scolded. He couldn't help but look at the vast ice field with yearning. In this world, only people with abilities like Lord Alex could go anywhere in the world, right? It's been more than 5 hours since we set off in the morning. The ice field is vast, and she's flying in the sky. How do you plan to find her? Irina asked Meg, who was standing in front of her. She must have come to the ice field because she heard about Rankster. She must have tried to find out some information about the undead army from the border. Meg looked ahead and said, "It's very difficult to find Elizabeth, but it's easier to find the huge skeleton army." Irina nodded slightly and didn't ask any more questions. She also scanned the ground below like Meg. The ice field was huge. The purple-striped griffin flew for 3 hours, and Meg only found 3 hiding places of the skeleton army. There were about 50,000 skeletons in each place. This time, Meg and Irina didn't try to exterminate them. Instead, they left silently after confirming that there were no traces of fighting and Elizabeth's figure. The longer they waited, the slimmer their hope. Meg looked at the storm that swept over from afar. The wind blades were mixed with ice and snow and created cracks on the ice surface. He was prepared to let Ozzy go around the storm and continue the search. "Wait." Irina suddenly stopped Meg. She pointed at the storm and said, "Look, is there something behind the storm?" Meg looked in the direction of Irina's finger. His eyes narrowed slightly and then suddenly widened. Behind the storm, a huge figure could be vaguely seen flapping its wings. However, judging from its posture, it seemed to be engaged in battle. "Z, go through the storm," Meg ordered. "Awa." The purple-striped griffin raised its head and let out a long cry. It flapped its wings and flew toward the storm like a bolt of lightning. The frost WIRM with a wingspan of more than 100 meters flapped its wings to avoid the ice spears flying from below. There were several huge bloody holes on its pure white wings, and there was even an ice spear that didn't penetrate it. There were tens of thousands of undead army below her, and dozens of powerful skeletons leading them were holding javelin-like ice spears in their hands. They looked up at the frost WIRM and then threw the ice spears in their hands. There were 2 shriveled ancient dragon corpses in front and behind her. They stared at her with their scarlet eyes, and their wings were bigger than the frost WIRMs. They blocked all her escape routes. Judging from the few scarlet wounds on her body, these 2 undead dragons were not to be trifled with. Elizabeth was a little anxious. Originally, she just wanted to get close to the undead army to take a look and then leave like before. She didn't expect to be discovered and blocked by 2 undead dragons. These 2 undead dragons were above level 9 before they died. Although she couldn't tell what species they were, their bones were extremely hard. After demonization, they retained the strength they had when they were alive and were very difficult to deal with. Among the ancient corpses on the ground, there was no lack of level 10 existences. Even though she had already taken to the sky, she was still seriously injured. She was desperate because she couldn't find her father. If she didn't leave this place now, she might not have the chance to do so. She was losing blood quickly, and her physical strength and magic power were reaching their limits. No one could help her on this ice field. She could only make one last gamble. Roar. Elizabeth let out a furious roar and flapped her wings. The surrounding cold air condensed, and countless ice cones, as thick as bowls, formed. Then, they abruptly fell down. At the same time, she activated the frost domain. Space seemed to have frozen, and the speed of the ice spears that were flying toward her slowed down. The speed of the 2 undead dragons was also affected. "Now's the time." Elizabeth's eyes lit up, and she spat out a crystal ball of ice from her mouth. It exploded instantly and wrapped around her wound like a gel. At the same time, she flapped her wings with all her might, changed her direction, and crashed into the storm. The violent storm was her only hope. The spears from below were the ones that could give her a fatal blow. The ancient corpses reacted and broke free from the restrictions of the frost domain and tried to chase after Elizabeth. They were 1 step behind and lost the initiative. Elizabeth was confident that she could shake off these 2 somewhat sluggish undead dragons. However, at this moment, a sharp sound of something breaking through the air was heard from below. Elizabeth subconsciously lowered her head, and there was a look of shock in her eyes. A golden javelin flew over from below, tearing a white scar in the air as it flew toward her with a power that struck fear into her heart. The frost domain collapsed in an instant, and it did not even cause the golden spear to slow down. At this moment, Elizabeth felt the arrival of death. She did not feel any fear. She was just a little regretful, and a little worried. Regretful that she could not see her father again. No matter what he became, she wanted to see him again. She was worried that Mia would not be able to survive. These guys were indeed terrifying. She did not know if the hastily formed coalition army could hold on.
So be it.
Elizabeth laughed at herself in her heart. She was a little arrogant, but she did not regret it. She took a deep breath and waited for the final moment to come, and to take one last look at this world. Then she saw the purple lightning bolt that came through the storm, as well as a light that was even faster than it.
Ding!
A crisp sound echoed in the ice field. The golden sphere collided with the white light that was flying towards it. Then, starting from the tip of the spear, it was cut in half. The spear flew upward without losing its momentum. However, after being cut in half, it passed by Elizabeth's side and continued to fly into the sky. Only then did the white light reveal its true form. It was a short and thick Chinese kitchen knife. However, it only paused for a moment, then turned into a stream of light again, slid past the two undead dragons, and cut them into 156 pieces, like roasted ducks. The purple lightning passed through the storm and stopped in front of Elizabeth. The man standing on the back of the purple-striped griffin looked at her with deep eyes. Chapter 2162. Why is it him again? Elizabeth looked at the person who had come, and her heart suddenly calmed down. The serious injury, the fatal shock, and the joy of escaping from danger all stacked together, causing her to lose consciousness instantly. A silver light flashed, and her body quickly shrank, turning into a human, and fell down. The purple-striped griffin swooped down, and Meg reached out to catch her gently, then handed her over to Irina behind him. Her injuries are very serious. Irina sat down with Elizabeth in her arms, took out a bottle of milk of life, and poured it into her mouth. At the same time, she chanted a healing spell to stop the bleeding and heal her. Meg looked sideways at Elizabeth's blood-stained body, and his expression became cold. He looked down at the giant skeleton that had thrown out a golden javelin again, and reached out a finger. The fat head fish floating beside him turned into a stream of light and flew down. The golden javelin was cut in half in the air, and the fat head fish landed on the skeleton giant's head without slowing down. 1 slash, 2 halves. An ordinary level 10 demonized skeleton was nothing more than that. The fat head fish circled around the group of skeletons, and only returned to his side after slaughtering all the level 8 and level 9 skeletons. He raised his hand and glanced at the red that was quickly approaching on the dial, and ordered Ozzy to fly in the opposite direction at full speed without any hesitation. 5 minutes later, a huge, indescribable creature covered in black scales slowly rose from under the ice, and its huge bat wings covered the sky. Tens of thousands of ancient corpses knelt on the ground, showing their allegiance to Cthulhu. This guy is really annoying to the extreme. Josh also walked out from under the ice and looked at the slaughtered ancient corpses with a sinister smile. Find him and kill him. Cthulhu's low voice sounded, and it was disgusting, like a broken gong rubbing against each other. In 3 days, the star demon eclipse will happen, and our Ela will surface on the surface of the sea. The star spawns will awaken, and we will dominate this world again. Josh smiled coldly. By then, everyone will die. The purple-striped griffin flew south at full speed. Meg looked at the red that had stopped moving and let out a sigh of relief. He turned around and looked at Elizabeth, who was wrapped in Irina's down jacket, and asked, "How's the situation?" "My injuries have stabilized, but I'm exhausted. I need to have a good sleep. After I wake up, I'll need to recuperate for a while," Irina said with a relaxed expression. Meg nodded. If Irina said that there was no problem, then there was no problem. However, Elizabeth looked much thinner than when she left. She must have suffered a lot during this period of time and almost lost her life here. She couldn't help but sigh, because she wanted to find Rankster. "Do you think Rankster would recognize her if he saw her?" Irina asked. "I'm not sure. Even if he did, I'm afraid he wouldn't be able to control himself. Meg shook his head. As Cthulhu's strongest subordinate, and the only one who still had signs of life, Meg didn't think that Elizabeth would be able to free him from his control just by going up to acknowledge her father. Unless they could seal Cthulhu first and reduce his control over Rankster, there might be some hope. The purple-striped griffin successfully returned to the camp. Dominic's adjutant arranged a room for Elizabeth so that she could rest. The adjutant looked at Meg respectfully and said, "My lord, are you going to the meeting hall? A few of the lords have just arrived." Although he wasn't sure what happened after Meg entered the ice field, judging from the injured dragoness, Lord Alex should have fought with those skeletons after entering the ice field. Meg nodded. He also wanted to know who had arrived so quickly. "Dominic, how could you let Elizabeth enter the ice field? Don't you know how dangerous the ice field is? She's only a child." Meg had yet to reach the meeting hall when he heard Lewis's angry voice coming from behind the half-closed door. "Lewis, although I'm in the north, I only got the news this morning, and she has already left," Dominic said. You.
Sigh.
Lewis sighed heavily, and then angrily said, "I want to enter the ice field. Alex has already gone. You'd better wait for him to come back. You know nothing about the ice field. If we fall into the devil's trap, we will have another powerful enemy," Dominic said. "Wait a while more." Douglas's heavy voice also sounded. "You wait. I can't afford to wait." Lewis slammed the table. Rankster is already in such a state. She only has 2 daughters. It's fine if Mia stays in Chaos City, but if something happens to Elizabeth, will you be able to live with your conscience?
Mia?
Meg, who was about to push open the door, stopped in his tracks. Apart from being shocked, he also came to a realization. Mia is also Rankster's daughter? But isn't she a golden dragon? Irina was also a little surprised. You might have forgotten that Rankster is a hybrid of a golden dragon and a frost dragon. So, although Elizabeth is a frost dragon and Mia is a golden dragon, it doesn't affect that they are half-sisters, Meg explained. No wonder Elizabeth, who kept a distance from everyone, was like a sister to Mia. There was actually a reason why the noble frost dragon princess taught a low-level half-dragon how to fly and fight. That Rankster is really a jerk. Irina pursed her lips. He was only responsible for giving birth, but never for raising them. He was absent from his daughters' lives and caused them to be in a difficult situation. Meg was silent. Rankster was indeed not worthy of being called a qualified father. However, when he saw the struggle in his eyes when he heard Elizabeth's name that day, he couldn't criticize him further. He wasn't the one who released Cthulhu. Meg was very sure of that. "I've brought her back." Meg pushed open the door of the meeting room and walked in. The heated meeting room fell silent. Everyone's gaze landed on Meg and Irina, who were standing at the door. Apart from Lewis and Douglas, Jonas and Barbara were also in the meeting room. "Where is she? Is she injured?" Lewis asked with concern as he walked up to Meg. Douglas was also staring at Meg. "She's injured, but it's already been treated. We've arranged a place for her to stay, and she's resting now." Meg nodded. "That's great. I was still worried that something had happened to Sister Elizabeth. I have to go and see her later," Barbara mumbled softly as she patted her non-existent chest. "Thank goodness." Lewis heaved a sigh of relief and cupped his fists at Meg and Irina to express his gratitude. Douglas's tense expression also relaxed a lot. He looked at Meg and asked, "She encountered ancient corpses?" "An undead army with a scale of about 30,000. She was trapped by 2 zombie dragons and was injured by the javelins of the ancient corpses on the ground." Meg nodded. "There are zombie dragons too." Everyone in the meeting room was shocked. The intelligence on the undead army had been updated recently, but there was never any mention of the existence of flying troops. This didn't even appear in their battle preparations. Chapter 2163. You can find ancient corpses of any race in the ice field, including those that have disappeared in the long river of history and didn't even appear in ancient records. Meg looked at everyone and calmly said, "It's not surprising that there's a zombie dragon. They might even have more ancient flying corpses. Everyone's expression was grave. This wasn't good news. This war might be more difficult than they imagined. Apart from the zombie dragon, the ice spears they throw are also very lethal. Although the demonized ancient corpses have lost their abilities, their strength has been increased. Irina continued, I checked Elizabeth's injuries earlier. The ice spears are very powerful, and they'll leave demonic aura around the wound after she's injured. It'll aggravate the injury and make it difficult to heal and treat. How do we deal with the demonic aura? Dominic asked. It's impossible not to get injured in the war. Irina shook her head slightly and said, I used holy light to get rid of the demonic aura, but there are very few light elemental magic casters, and I can't treat everyone. I have to think of another way. Everyone frowned. If they couldn't heal the injured, it would greatly affect their morale. They had to find a solution. Maybe we can try soaking cinnabar or glutinous rice in water. Since they can produce miraculous effects on ancient corpses, they should be able to suppress the demonic aura, Meg said. Everyone's eyes lit up. This was a good direction. Cinnabar and glutinous rice would be continuously delivered to the front line. If these two things were really effective, it would be great. I'll go check on Elizabeth. Barbara stood up and nodded at Meg and Irina as a greeting.
Then she left.
Meg waved his hand and closed the door of the conference hall. He pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked at Lewis and Douglas and said, the construction of the frontline fortifications is very tight now. We need your support. You want us to build fortifications? Lewis frowned. Isn't that what the dwarven craftsmen do? Douglas was also a little surprised. It seemed like Dominic hadn't had the time to explain the situation at the front line to the two of them. Meg said, the dwarven craftsmen haven't arrived in the north yet. They are mostly responsible for the forging of weapons. There are still hundreds of pits in the north of the Gus Mountain range that haven't been filled up. It will take 10 days for the Roth Empire's northern army to complete it, so I need the help of the giant dragons. Douglas pondered for a moment before asking, how many giant dragons do you need? I want all the dragons from the Frost Dragon tribe that can freeze ice and as many wind dragons as possible, said Meg. All right, they will all arrive tomorrow. Douglas nodded. Meg nodded. He liked this kind of cooperative guy. Dominic then explained the current defensive arrangements in the north to everyone. The Gus Mountain Range and the three canyons were the core of the entire battle. They would make use of their defensive advantage to eliminate the million undead army in front of the Gus Mountain Range, not allowing a single ancient corpse to escape. It wasn't ingenious, but there was no choice in the plan. However, after listening to Dominica's arrangements, everyone had a deeper understanding of the importance of pre-battle fortifications. This was a plan that couldn't afford any mistakes, so everything had to be done flawlessly. I'll get the golden dragons to arrive earlier too. If there's a need, they can be dispatched at any time, Lewis said. The cannons stored in Chaos City have to be transported to the front line. Get them to transport a batch to the front line, Meg said to Lewis. All right. Lewis nodded. Apart from living creatures and materials, why don't we use the space storage device for transportation? Jonas, who had been silent all this while, raised his first question. The space storage device is limited, and the amount of materials needed to transport 1 million soldiers is a huge number, Jonas said. He had thought of this idea before, but even Irina's space ring could only store 30 cannons, and her space ring was full now. Furthermore, space stones were very precious. Even magic casters couldn't have one each. I see. Jonas nodded thoughtfully. Then he took out a palm-sized box, opened it, and took out another box. When he opened that box, there was another box inside. Please don't use Russian dolls. Meg couldn't help but remind him. Jonas took out 10 small boxes and then pushed them forward with both hands. These are all large space storage devices. The space in each of them is similar to the space in this hall. I can lend them to you temporarily. So big? Everyone's eyes lit up when they saw the row of small boxes. There were very few space magic casters, and they weren't inferior to the space magic casters. The materials used to create the space storage devices were also very precious.
It was rare to see such a huge space storage device. They didn't expect Jonas to take out 10 of them just like that. Thank you. Meg cupped his hands. He knew very well how important these 10 huge storage boxes could be now. Not to mention other things. Using them to transport cannons and shells could not only reduce the wear and tear on the road, but also save an immeasurable amount of manpower and material resources. The transportation of emergency materials was even more convenient and fast. The Norland continent was vast, and it would take several days for all the races to gather in the north. The transportation of supplies was even more difficult. These 10 boxes could be used for the transportation of the most urgent materials, such as cinnabar powder, mahogany arrows, and cannons. Douglas and Lewis were going to visit Elizabeth, while Meg invited Jonas to go out with them. Jonas had arrived at the front line early because he was invited by Meg. The construction of the ceiling spell formation was of utmost importance, and only Jonas could complete it. The materials for the construction of the spell formation have been prepared, and the spell formation masters have all arrived. Has Mr. Alex chosen a location? Jonas asked as he followed Meg out of the hall. Please follow me. Meg blew the whistle to summon Ozzy. He jumped onto the griffin's back and invited Jonas up. The griffin took off and flew one round around the Gus mountain range. If it weren't for this mountain range, the Norland continent would really be defenseless. This was the first time Jonas saw the entire Gus mountain range, and he couldn't help but lament. Master, where do you think is the most suitable place to set up the spell formation in this 50-kilometer line of defense? Meg asked Jonas. Jonas looked at Meg with a smile and said, the important thing isn't where to set it up, but how to let Cthulhu enter the seal. I think you should have already determined where to set up the spell formation. Meg raised his hand and pointed to the canyon on the left. I plan to set up the spell formation there. Then, how do you plan to let it enter the spell formation? I will be guarding there on the day of the great battle. I bet Cthulhu will think I'm not guarding the seal's spell formation, Meg said with a smile. Chapter 2164. Jonas looked at Meg in disbelief. He opened his mouth and closed it again. After a while, he said, It doesn't sound very reliable. There's no reliable way to deal with an immortal existence like Cthulhu. We can only take a gamble, Meg said helplessly. He had made countless deductions, but they were all overturned by him in the end. Therefore, he could only try Teacher Seema's thousand-layer cake theory and take a gamble. I need you to set up 10 decoy formations on the Gus Mountain range. Work on them at the same time. Make the decoy formations on the 2 valleys on the left and right bigger, Meg said. Jonas couldn't figure out what Meg was thinking, but he was the chief commander, so it wasn't a problem for him to make the decision. He nodded and said, All right. We will start tonight. Thank you. Meg brought Jonas back to the command center and got Dominic to cooperate fully with Jonas' work. Lewis, how's the investigation on the Peach Mountain in the Dragon Territory? Meg asked Lewis, who was about to leave, as he stopped him. Lewis looked at Meg and said, Jinx reported that the Peach Mountain is about 500 kilometers northwest of Golden Dragon Island. It should be big enough to support this war. The orcs and elves logging teams have already arrived. If the other races still need it, they will have to do it themselves. All right.
Meg nodded. This was a good idea. BKWX. XYZ Psi. Previously, he and Dominic had also talked about the peachwood problem. The Roth Empire had received a large amount of peachwood from their territory, but there was still a shortage.
Ding, ding.
Screech, the sound of hammers hammering on steel and red-hot iron pieces being quenched in water, could be heard in the huge forging workshop. Thousands of blacksmiths from various races were forging cannons in full swing. Lulu, who was like a little cow, swung the giant hammer in her hand tirelessly and hammered the iron pieces on the forging table. Meanwhile, Mabai, who was standing at the side, was staring at a newly formed cannon on the forging table next door. This is good stuff. You can make it in 2 more days. The blacksmith next door noticed Mabai's expression and patted the cannon with a smile. It is indeed good stuff. Mabai nodded and swallowed his saliva. He was most familiar with this thing. After Lulu took over, he took over most of the forging work in the shop. He spent almost every day researching how to forge better cannons. However, they did not expect that as soon as they entered the munitions factory, the first task they received was to forge cannons. Looking at the mighty black cannon, Mabai was a little dazed. Was this developed by the city lord's mansion? Mabai probed. It's said to be a blueprint provided by a mysterious person. Don't be fooled by its black, thick, and inflexible appearance. It's said that its power is astonishing. One shot can hit over 10 miles away and destroy a house. The blacksmith smiled and said, "We need to make a few more cannons. All of them will be used to fight the undead at the front lines." Mysterious man, Mabai said thoughtfully. Only Mr. Mack could give the city lord's mansion a piece of paper when the war was approaching. Mr. Mack had not discussed cannons with him recently. He did not expect him to come up with a perfect plan and increase the range of the cannon to more than 10 miles. This was far beyond the cannons he had developed. Mr. Mack is indeed a genius. Mabai sighed in his heart. He did not resent Meg for hiding the piece of paper from him. He only took it out in such an urgent situation, and even gave it to the city lord's mansion for free to fight against the devils and the undead army. He had already guessed Meg's thoughts. If the undead army had not invaded, he would not have taken out the cannon at all. Such a powerful weapon that could be controlled by ordinary people could become a disaster if it fell into the hands of someone with bad intentions. The munitions factory in Chaos City had expanded several times. As more and more blacksmiths volunteered to join, the munitions factory's output increased significantly. There were already hundreds of cannons displayed in the warehouse. The cannonballs packed in wooden boxes also filled up an entire warehouse. When can these cannons be sent to the front line? Michael asked the person in charge of the munitions factory when he came out of the warehouse. "City Lord, the cannons are here. They can be sent away anytime." The person in charge shook his head at Michael and said, "But a cannon weighs more than 10 tons. There are very few flying mounts in Chaos City that can bear such a weight. It takes 2 days to go to the front line and back, and only one cannon can be sent away at a time." Michael frowned. "What if we go by land?" "If we go by land, we will need a batch of custom-made wagons. However, I'm afraid the road to the Roth Empire will not be able to support carriages of such weight. More importantly, if we go by land, we will need at least 10 days to reach the front line in the ice field under the best circumstances," the person in charge said. Michael frowned. He pondered for a while and said, "Seems like we have to ask the dragons for help. The war will be over in 10 days. Chaos City's vanguard had already set off north, and the rest of the troops were also on their way. "Young mistress, the first batch of 3,000 cotton-padded jackets has been received. Although the craftsmanship is a little uneven, they are still pretty good. They can keep warm and keep warm." Mars strode into the office quickly and excitedly told Gloria, who was writing a letter at her desk. "So fast." Gloria looked up with surprise.
"Yes.
Everyone is very enthusiastic, and they are all asking for more cotton cloth to continue making cotton-padded jackets." Mars nodded. Gloria stood up excitedly and paced around the office. She nodded and said, "They are going all out to supply cotton cloth. Their efficiency is not lower than our factories at all. It's not just not lower. There should be more cotton-padded jackets completed tonight. You have no idea how many people in the city are making cotton-padded jackets now. This is the first time I've seen families of all ages making cotton-padded jackets." Mars sighed with emotion. The final battle was imminent, and the soldiers needed winter clothes. After the city lord's castle's request was issued, everyone, from the commoners to the wealthy merchants, responded to the call to collect cotton cloth to make winter clothes for the soldiers. Everyone wanted to contribute to this war. There were also many people who directly donated cotton-padded jackets for their own use to the warriors on the front line. "That's great." Gloria nodded. She was even more impressed with Mr. Hill now. If it weren't for his suggestion, she would still be worrying about how to prepare enough cotton-padded jackets for the soldiers.
Sigh.
Why did the world change so quickly? Harrison sat on a bench outside the ice cream shop with George, who was also holding an ice cream, and heaved a long sigh as he licked his ice cream. That's right. The world has changed so quickly. George nodded with a worried expression. Chapter 2165. The announcement from the City Lord's castle informed all the residents of Chaos City of the truth. In the past few days, many powerhouses had volunteered to join the guards and apply to go to the front line. Many craftsmen and tailors had also joined the logistics team. Even the commoners were making cotton-padded clothes for the warriors. However, the oppressive atmosphere before the war still shrouded Chaos City. Nobody knew if the Allied army could win this war and what kind of fate they would face. Why don't I join the battle team too? Going to the front line to kill a few skeletons is better than waiting at the back, Harrison said to George seriously. George stared at him for a while, thinking of how to dispel his friend's dangerous thoughts. But we don't have armor of your type. A soft voice sounded. The two of them were stunned and turned around at the same time. Amy, who was holding an ice cream in one hand and a fat yellow cat in the other, was looking at them with a smile. Little boss. Harrison's and George's eyes lit up in surprise. Are you back? Is the restaurant going to reopen? Harrison asked. Yes, I'm back. But father left again, so the restaurant is not reopening. Amy shook her head. Where did Mr. Mac go? It's so chaotic everywhere now, George asked with concern. Mr. Mac actually left his child behind to go out at such a time? Father went to cook for the brave warriors. He said he would only be back in a few days. Amy looked at George curiously and asked, Uncle Blue Fatty, where's little sister Christy? Has she grown up? When can you bring her over for me to play with? Mr. Mac is at the front line too? Harrison and George were both shocked. Christy has already started to learn how to talk, but she can only babble. If little boss wants to play with Christy, you can come to my house anytime, George said with a smile. Parber and Angus even said they miss you very much 2 days ago. Amy tilted her head and was a little troubled. But I don't miss them at all. I only miss Christy. Little brothers and whatnot are not cute at all. As a daughter's slave, George actually wanted to give her a thumbs up. Mr. Mac is indeed the role model of our generation. He never flinched in the face of danger. Looks like I have to go back and make my own armor so that I can go to the front line to kill the enemy. Harrison said with a determined look in his eyes. Uncle Red Fatty, if you can swing the sword 3 times without tripping yourself, I think you can still give it a try, Amy said to Harrison with a serious expression. Harrison imagined the scene seriously and soon gave up on himself. As expected, money alone won't do if you don't have a skill. Harrison leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. The old man who was picking up bottles clenched his walking stick tightly and only released it after a while.
Goodbye.
I'm going to play with my friends now. Amy waved the ice cream away before skipping away, with Ugly Duckling in her arms.
Plop.
A strange sound came from the yard, and Luna stopped writing. She looked in the direction of the backyard and hesitated for a moment before getting up and walking there. When she opened the back door, she saw a figure in silver armor lying face down in the yard. One of his feet was even propped up on the low wall of the yard. Oh my God! Luna was shocked. She picked up the hoe that was leaning against the wall and looked at the person lying on the ground nervously. Who are you? Why did you climb over the wall and come into my yard? This was the teacher's dormitory of Chaos School. There were security guards guarding the school gate 24/7, and they patrolled frequently. It should be very safe here. How could someone sneak into the school and into her yard? Hearing her voice, the figure moved. He put his hands on the ground as if he was trying to get up. Luna was already thinking of countless single women who were raped by thugs at home. She looked at the guy who was trying to get up, and she didn't know where her courage came from. She closed her eyes and swung the hoe down.
Thump.
There was a muffled sound. Luna's hand was a little numb from the impact, and the figure who had just managed to get up was smashed back to the ground. You killed me. A sobbing voice sounded.
Huh.
Luna was stunned. She looked down at the ponytail peeking out from under the armor, and suddenly realized something. She quickly threw away the hoe in her hand, and squatted down to flip the person over. The person with the mud and snow on her face was Vivian, who had a resentful look on her face. What are you doing? Why are you dressed like this? Why did you climb over the wall? Luna looked at Vivian in shock.
Tui.
Vivian spat out the mud in her mouth, and angrily said, "Are you trying to murder your sister? My head is buzzing from all the smashing." "Let me see." Luna quickly helped her up and sat down on the chair beside her. She took off her helmet and confirmed that the back of her head was not injured under the protection of the high-grade helmet. Then she took out a handkerchief and helped her wipe her face. She said in a bad mood, "Luckily, I didn't use a knife." You vicious woman." Vivian glared. "You didn't use the door, but you chose to climb over the wall. And you even wore such an ill-fitting armor. You deserved it." Luna poked her head. She was also frightened and thought that some bad guys had come in. Knights never use the door. This wall is the first opponent I've met since I started my career." Vivian looked back at the short wall and said angrily. She wanted to make a handsome appearance, but she didn't expect to be defeated on the spot. It was too embarrassing. What knight? Other knights abide by the knight code. They won't climb over the wall and enter other people's houses. Luna rolled her eyes and looked at the ill-fitting armor on Vivian. "But what are you going to do today? Are you going to dress up as a knight?" "No, this is not a costume. From today onwards, I'm a knight who punishes the strong and helps the weak." Vivian's expression turned cold. She reached for her waist, but she touched nothing.
Huh.
Vivian lowered her head. "Where's my sword?" Vivian was shocked. She looked left and right, and suddenly she was a little panicked. "It's hanging there." Luna pointed up. Vivian raised her head and looked at the long sword hanging on the branch of a tree that was more than 3 meters high. She fell into silence. It was most likely that when she fell from the wall, she swung it and hung it on the tree. "Actually, I hung it on purpose. As a knight, the sword is there. You can lose your head, but you can't lose your sword, right? You know." Vivian looked left and right, looking for a long bamboo pole that could pick up the long sword. Chapter 2166. Don't bother looking for it. I'll go next door and borrow a drying pole for you, Luna said with a smile. Hee, Luna is the best. Vivian immediately smiled and hugged Luna's arm. Don't talk nonsense. Tell me, why are you here in this outfit? Luna looked at her and asked. I'm here to say goodbye to you.
Goodbye?
Yes, I've decided. I'm going to the front line of the far north to fight the undead army. Vivian nodded confidently. Are you serious? Luna stared at Vivian for a while. Of course. Vivian raised her chin and looked into the distance. I'm a lonely swordswoman. I'm destined to walk on the edge of a blade. You don't have to persuade me. You can't persuade me. You're a knight who fell when climbing a wall. You still want to go to the front line? That was an accident. An accident. What about the swordsman who threw away his sword? That was also an accident. You snuck out of your house, right?
Ah.
How did you know? I saw your bag hanging on the wall. I threw it away. This armor isn't warm, is it? No. Vivian changed into Luna's outfit and sat on the bed with the blanket wrapped around her. She looked at Luna, who was sitting at the table and writing. Luna put down her pen and folded the letter. She walked to the bed and asked, When do you plan to go home? I'm not going home. I'm going to the front line. Vivian shook her head. Luna looked into her eyes and said seriously, Do you know how many knights have to sacrifice their lives to save a noble young lady who doesn't have the ability to protect herself on the battlefield? I can protect myself. Vivian averted her gaze, her confidence waning. Hope school is going to start soon. You're a new teacher and have a lot of work to do. Your battlefield is on the podium. How to let the students listen obediently and how to let them learn knowledge is what you should be doing.
Me?
Vivian raised her head and looked into Luna's eyes. She was a little discouraged, But she still said unwillingly, "But if we lose the war, it will be difficult for the children to even survive, let alone learn. I want to do something for this war. I heard that in the past 2 days, they have been distributing cotton cloth and cotton to sew cotton-padded clothes for the soldiers. I am going to go out to send a letter and get some cotton cloth and cotton to sew cotton-padded clothes for the soldiers. Do you want to come with me?" Luna put away the letter and smiled. "Sure." Vivian nodded and jumped up from the bed. "We can also grab a hot pot later." At the border between the Twilight Forest and the Roth Empire, a huge orc army was passing through quickly. The tall walls were torn down, and the deep trenches were filled in. The knights of the Roth Empire stood on both sides to welcome their former enemies into the Empire's borders. A 200,000-strong orc army crossing the border was something that had never happened in the Roth Empire's 100-year history. However, the orc army crossing the border this time was not for an invasion. They were going to the north to fight alongside the Roth Empire's warriors to resist the invasion of the undead army. The elite main force of the Northwestern Army had already set off for the north a few days ago. The Roth Empire would be in charge of the orc army's logistics from the moment they entered the Roth Empire's borders. However, what surprised the soldiers who stayed behind was that almost all of these orc warriors were carrying a bulging bag. They could see a hoof or a tail sticking out from the bag, often. They even saw an orc who was over 5 meters tall using a metal rod to carry 2 bison that weighed more than 500 kilograms. Yes, this 200,000-strong orc army had brought their own rations with them on the journey. Furthermore, all the wild beasts and magic beasts that could be captured within a radius of tens of miles would become their food. This made the soldiers of the Empire who were preparing to feed this huge army along the way heave a sigh of relief and reduce a lot of pressure. Connie sat on the unicorn and said to Rex, "I have already communicated with Andre. When we reach Chaos City, a granary will be open for us. We will have to carry the rations to the front line ourselves. When the orcs go to war, they have always carried their own rations to the battlefield. There's no such thing as a logistics team. That is not a problem." Rex nodded. Connie nodded. That was indeed an orc's tradition. Rex looked at the long line of soldiers and said in a low voice, "We have to discipline the troops well. Many of our people still have hatred in their hearts, but we need everyone to be united in this situation." Connie nodded and said, "I will gather all the chiefs for a meeting tonight and ask them to discipline the warriors in their tribes." Above the boundless sea realm, thousands of merfolk warriors walked on the waves. As the High Priest of Lantist, Dexter was also the leader of this expedition. Gina rode on a big dolphin and followed Dexter around. "Master, is it especially cold in the north?" Gina asked.
Yes.
"In the extreme north ice plains, water will turn into ice if you splash it on it. The weather is extremely cold." Dexter nodded. "Phew. That's terrible." Gina shivered. The boundless sea realm was warm all year round, and there was no trace of ice and snow even in winter. After a while, Gina asked Dexter, "However, do we really not need to tell Mr. Meg about the anomaly that happened at the bottom of the sea?" Dexter thought for a while and nodded. "We will tell him when we reach the extreme north ice plains. We have yet to find out what exactly caused the anomaly." Gina nodded. She still felt a little uneasy when she recalled the scene of the sky pillar trembling violently yesterday. This war is more important than anything else. We cannot let Mr. Meg be distracted by these trivial matters. Dexter seemed to have seen through Gina's thoughts. He shook his head with a smile and said, "Moreover, His Majesty is guarding the tribe. Nothing will happen." I understand." Gina nodded with a smile. Dexter attracted his gaze and lowered his head to look at the surface of the sea. His expression was also solemn. The anomaly yesterday was indeed a little unusual. There seemed to be something trying to escape from under Lantist, causing the sky pillar to tremble continuously. This situation lasted for the entire night and only stopped this morning. The spell formation masters of Lantist had already sped up the ceiling around the sky pillar. Although they were not sure what was under the sky pillar, it was still very important. The shadow of the devil had yet to dissipate, and His Majesty was confirming if there was an ancient seal around the sky pillar, as well as if there was a devil sealed under Lantist. Before that, he planned to report this matter to Mr. Meg when he met him personally. There was no situation more urgent than the million-strong undead army in the north. Chapter 2167. Why aren't Mr. Hades and the rest back yet? AI faced it at the door and looked at the closed Saipan tavern with a worried expression. The panic of the war had been spreading in Rodu for the past few days. Regardless of whether it was the army confiscating the peach trees and glutinous rice, or the various rumors circulating in the streets, all of them indicated that something big was about to happen. The situation was so chaotic, and Mr. Hades and his family were nowhere to be found. This made AI Faye a little worried. Master, and the rest aren't back yet. Mara walked out from behind AI Faye and looked at the tavern opposite. Then, she craned her neck to look in another direction. It's open. If you want to watch the show for free, go ahead. AI Faye knew what she was looking at and smiled. That's not a show. That's an opera. Mara emphasized. Isn't an opera just a show? It's not the same. An opera is a performance with singing, but a show doesn't have singing. Mara shook her head and smiled as she held AI Faye's arm. Miss, why don't you come with me? Miss Black Cat is so beautiful. Also, they just opened yesterday, and the tickets are half price.
No.
AI Faye refused. She was really not interested in these things. If she had to sit there for a few hours without moving, it would be worse than killing her. Oh, right, you said Mr. Hades let them stay in that building. Did he say anything else to you? Like rent or something? AI Faye asked Mara. The opera troupe came quickly, and they were even faster. In just 2 or 3 days, they had already cleaned up the place, both inside and outside. Yesterday, they even put up a sign and opened for a trial operation. She went to take a look yesterday and found that most of the items were old items left behind by the circus. After cleaning up, the stage was repainted, and it looked quite presentable. She was not interested, but Mara was crazy about it. These 2 days, she would go to the opera theater whenever she was free, and she would promote it to everyone she met. The tickets were not expensive, only 50 copper coins each. Children were half price, and there was a half-price promotion for the first few days. Mr. Hades had hundreds of shops, and this was the first one that was rented out. Therefore, many neighbors went to join in the fun. They all wanted to see what this opera house was, and why Mr. Hades looked at it in a different light. After watching the performance, the neighbors were full of praises. For the past 2 days, the neighbors had been talking about Miss Black Cat's story. When it came to emotional parts, the aunties would even shed silent tears. They were deeply engrossed in the drama. No, Master just asked me to give the key and a letter to Leader Vicky. I've read the letter. Master lent the building to them for the performance and didn't ask for rent. Mara shook her head. He didn't ask for rent? AI Faye was a little surprised. The opera house's shop was huge and could be compared to several ordinary shops. Although the layout was a little strange, with the rising housing prices and rental prices on Romo Street, a casual change to the layout would cost hundreds of thousands of copper coins a year. But Mr. Hades actually gave the shop to the opera troupe for free. Could it be that Mr. Hades and Miss Vicky are friends? Or is there another reason? Eiffel wondered. Mara let go of Effie's hand and said, Miss, then I'll go by myself. I have an appointment with the leader to practice the play. She said she can arrange the role of a maid for me. You want to be an actress? AI Faye looked at Mara. I'm just casually playing a guest role. Mara blushed. Go, come back early tonight to cook. AI Faye waved her hand. Okay. A smile appeared on Mara's face as she skipped towards the opera house. AI Faye looked at Mara's back and smiled helplessly. This girl wants to learn everything. Mara ran into the opera house. She had become familiar with everyone in the opera house these past few days. She greeted the performers familiarly and then obediently sat on a seat on the side, holding her chin as she watched the performers rehearse. The performers of the Black Cat Song Troupe were also used to this little girl coming to watch the performance every day. Most of them had also done the same in the beginning and had become one of them. They could see from Mara's eyes that she liked it and wanted to become an opera singer. This was very important. Moreover, the leader liked this little girl very much, so they naturally wouldn't say anything. "Mara, you're here." Vicky walked out from behind the stage and said to Mara, who was sitting in the audience, "Yes, I'm here to watch everyone rehearse." Mara quickly stood up and nodded. "Do you really want to learn opera?" Vicky walked forward and looked into Mara's eyes. Although the leader wasn't tall, Mara felt pressured by her stare. After thinking seriously for a while, she nodded. "Yes, I want to learn. Learning opera is very difficult. Without 3 to 5 years, you won't be able to become a good opera singer." Vicky said calmly. "They've been learning for almost 2 years, but they're only at the beginner level. There's still a long way to go." "They're only at the beginner levels?" Mara was shocked. She felt that these big brothers and sisters sang very well, but in the leader's eyes, they were only at the beginner level. When she thought of her voice that sounded like a rooster's crowing when she opened her mouth, she immediately wanted to retreat. "Little Mara, don't be afraid. Uncle used to sell sugar water on the streets." An uncle with a shiny head looked at Mara and laughed. "Perseverance is victory. Come on, Ollie." Mara was successfully motivated by the uncle's encouragement, and her gaze became firm. She looked at Vicky and said, "I can do it." Vicky nodded and said, "If you join the opera troupe, then you'll have to eat and live in the opera troupe. I'll personally teach you how to become an opera singer."
Ah?
Mara was shocked and quickly shook her head.
No,
I want to learn opera, but I can't join the opera troupe. I still have a young lady to take care of at home." Vicky frowned and looked at Mara with a sharp gaze. "So, you want to be a free prostitute?" Mara felt that the leader's aura suddenly became very scary, and she became infinitely small. But she really couldn't just sell herself like this, because she belonged to the young lady, and even she didn't have the right to sell herself. Also, she said that she would learn to cook from her master. If she ate and lived in the opera troupe and had to rehearse every day, how would she have time to learn to cook? Can I come to learn every afternoon?" Mara shrank her neck and asked tentatively. She could only be an amateur opera singer. Even if she was just a walk-on, Mara wanted to experience the feeling of being on stage, the feeling of being the center of attention. Just thinking about it was very shameful, but also very exciting. Vicky frowned and looked at Mara. After a moment of silence, she said, "Come with me." Chapter 2168. Mara nervously followed Vicky backstage. The opera singers on the stage clenched their fists and gave her silent encouragement and blessings. "Is the leader going to lock me up and beat me up? I'm so obedient, I don't think so." Mara let her imagination run wild as she followed Vicky into a private room.
Click.
Vicky closed the door and locked it. Mara took half a step back and leaned against the wall. She looked at Vicky nervously. Leader Vicky gave her a strange feeling. Sometimes, she was gentle and kind, like a caring little sister who would patiently teach her how to pronounce and sing. But sometimes, she was like a strict teacher who would pull out a thick and long pointer to teach her a lesson at any time. Mara was a little scared. But Leader Vicky's opera singing was too good. It was like the sound of nature, and she acted like the real Miss Black Cat. Mara admired her immensely. So now that Vicky was staring at her, she was a little scared, but also a little expectant. Would the leader agree to her request? "Do you know what's going on outside? Why has the streets been so noisy these 2 days?" Vicky asked. Mara was stunned for a moment. She didn't expect the leader to suddenly ask a completely unrelated question. She thought about it and felt that the leader must be testing her to see if her observation of life was meticulous. "I heard that there's going to be a war. Demons are coming to eat us, especially those little fatties who like to eat. So His Majesty the King ordered everyone to chop down the peach trees and hand them in. He said that he's going to the north to fight the demons," Mara said seriously. This was what Miss Black Cat told her in the morning. Because of this, she even ate a bowl of rice for breakfast. Vicky stared at Mara for a while and still felt that her words were illogical. Where can I get the latest news around here? Vicky asked. Of course, it's the Romo Street Information Center. Mara blurted out. There's such a place? Vicky frowned in surprise. Yes, it's right under the big trees on Romo Street. Every day after dinner, a large number of uncles and aunties would gather together to exchange the latest news they heard today. Then they would package it up and make it into a rumor. Mara nodded her little head. Vicky narrowed her eyes. She wasn't sure if this guy was just teasing her. Mara blinked, a little nervous, wondering if she had said something wrong.
Go out.
Today we'll learn how to stretch our voices from Ibaka. Vicky put her hand to her forehead and gestured for Mara to leave. Okay. Mara nodded happily and opened the door. It seemed that the leader had agreed to let her stay. Looks like I have to go out and take a look myself. Vicky picked up a jacket from the clothes rack and put it on. She put on a hat and a few silver coins before she left the house. Leader, are you going out? Uncle Ibaka, who was teaching Mara how to stretch her voice, looked at Vicky, who was wearing a jacket, and asked, Yes, I'm going out. The performance at noon is cancelled. I'll give you half a day off, Vicky said, and went out without looking back. The actors of the opera troupe who were rehearsing looked at each other. It was only the second day of the opening. How could the leader let them rest? These 2 days were the most glorious days of their career. The number of guests who came to watch the performance last night exceeded 20. Although most of them were neighbors, the 500 copper coins that they earned from the entrance ticket was very good. Although there were only 8 guests who came to watch the performance this morning, it was expected that there wouldn't be many people. It should be better at noon and at night. The leader was the soul of the whole situation. Without her, Miss Black Cat couldn't continue the performance. Okay, let's continue with the rehearsal. We'll give the audience a good opera tonight. Ibaka clapped his hands and let everyone continue with the rehearsal. Vicky went out and went to the street under the trees. The uncles and aunties who had just finished lunch had gathered, and the moment they opened their mouths, they were spreading exaggerated and shocking rumors. Vicky lowered the brim of her hat and listened for a long time. This was indeed a place where rumors were spread. In less than 10 minutes, she had already heard several pieces of ordinary news, which were turned into shocking rumors after a round of discussion. However, the topics of the uncles and aunties did not go beyond the 3 streets nearby. Vicky stood up silently, stood at the corner of the street for a while, and hailed a carriage. Go to the nearest information station, Vicky said.
Okay.
The coachman agreed. 10 minutes later, Vicky got out of the carriage. Looking at the small information station in front of her, she paid the fare and walked into the station. Another 10 minutes later, Vicky walked out of the station with a paper bag in her hand. She hailed another carriage and went back to the opera house. Vicky locked herself in her room and read the news about the demons and the war in the north carefully. Demons and an undead army of 1,000,000. Could they be the ancient invaders recorded in the ancient books? But weren't they sealed away? Vicky frowned and tapped her delicate finger lightly on the information. This was a piece of news that she had bought for 5 silver coins, and the content was very limited. However, the commotion in Rodu in the past few days was indeed related to the demons. It was said that all the races had formed an alliance to go up north to fight against the demons and the undead army. In the past 2 days, the guards had been collecting peach trees and glutinous rice from door to door to send them to the front line. Anyone who dared to hide them would be punished for treason. What should I do? If that demon is really an invader that was sealed away in the ancient times, should I report it to Grandpa? Vicky held her chin and was a little conflicted. She had finally escaped after much difficulty and hadn't even had the time to do anything. Why did she have to run into those blind demons? Damn it! Vicky clenched her fists. She didn't want to care about those invaders, but if that big blockhead destroyed the entire Norland continent, who would want to watch her opera? She had started to make a vow that she would create the most successful opera troupe. Now that she had finally found an opera house that she could stay in and a group of adorable audience members, this kind of thing suddenly happened. No, I have to go and take a look myself. I can't expose my location so easily. Otherwise, Grandpa will definitely send people to capture me. Vicky got up and walked to the corner of the wall. She knocked on the wall twice softly. Crack. A crisp mechanical sound rang out, and a small door popped out from the flat wall, revealing a small cabinet. There were only two things in the cupboard, a shiny, high-tech silver watch and a silver metal stick. Vicky took out the silver watch and put it on her wrist. The strap automatically contracted to a suitable degree of tightness. The dial lit up, and a virtual screen popped up. In the middle of the screen was a spaceship. The spaceship's parameters and status are normal. A line of small words quickly floated past. Vicky pulled down her sleeve to cover the watch. Then, she picked up the remaining silver metal stick and put it in her small bag. She slammed the door on the wall shut. Cancel the performance tonight, too. Let's take a break today, Vicky said, and went out again. Chapter 2169. The horse-drawn carriage stopped outside the city. Vicky paid the coachman the fare and walked away under the coachman's puzzled gaze. This young lady is too daring to leave the city alone. The coachman shook his head and turned the carriage back to the city. Vicky went over a hill and looked around to make sure there was no one around. She took out her watch again and tapped on the virtual screen a few times. The ground shook slightly, and the pile of dried leaves in the valley far away fell. A silver spaceship spewed out blue flames and rose slowly, hovering in front of Vicky. Vicky stepped on the spiral ladder and entered the cockpit. She took out the silver rod from her bag and inserted it into the hole in the middle of the steering wheel. Identity verification successful. Highest authority activated. A mechanical notification sounded. Go here. Vicky opened the map and marked a spot. Position confirmed. Autopilot activated. The mechanical voice sounded again. The spaceship started and disappeared outside Rodu. A spaceship floated above the boundless sea realm. She stared at the data that kept coming back from the virtual screen with a grave expression. The strange movement under Lantist caught her attention. She had been observing here for a day. According to the ancient records, the sinking of Lantist back then was related to Cthulhu's old lair, Ar-Ela City. However, Ar-Ela City had sunk for countless years and was directly pulled into the underground world. It should have been completely isolated from the Norland continent. Why would there be a sudden movement? She had already reported the situation to the underground city, but she was still waiting for a reply. Right at this moment, her gaze suddenly landed on the virtual screen at the side. There was a bright red dot that was moving quickly. It's the signal from the Black Cat. She's eyes lit up, and she immediately opened the map to check. Miss Vicky from the Roosevelt family ran away from home 3 years ago, and her whereabouts were unknown. She had come to the Norland continent to carry out an observation mission. Before she set off, the Roosevelt family had asked her to help find Miss Vicky on the Norland continent and to give her the signal locator of the Black Cat spaceship that she was piloting. However, this was the first time she detected the Black Cat's signal in the past few months. She used to think that Vicky was not on the Norland continent, but now it seemed that she might have not activated the Black Cat in the past few months. Looking at this route, could she be going to the far north ice fields? Looking at the fast-moving spaceship, Vicky was shocked. She hesitated for a while, but still activated the spaceship. The huge spaceship rose from the sea, and then turned into a stream of light that flew toward the North Pole. Vicky had already changed into a black combat suit. She sat in front of the control panel with a serious expression, looking at the approaching destination. Her objective for this trip was very simple. She was going to take care of that troublesome ancient invader before returning to Rodu. If she could make it in time, perhaps the performance at night wouldn't have to be cancelled, and the Black Cat Opera troupe would be able to earn a ticket price of 1,000 copper coins. I once read in an ancient book that the ancient invaders were very powerful and couldn't be killed. Therefore, our ancestors could only seal them all over the Norland continent. Can we kill them? Vicky murmured to herself worriedly.
You said it was from ancient times.
The ancients back then definitely did not have as advanced technology as they do now. Let's go up and shoot it with the electromagnetic cannon. Then, the entire ship will focus fire on it and send it to the sky. It's that simple and crude, Vicky answered her own question. But don't be so wishy-washy. I'll control the spaceship later. I'll show you what absolute firepower is. Vicky smiled, and her eyes were full of excitement. What's that? A mountain range appeared on the screen. It was like a city wall on the snowfield. The camera zoomed in. Many humans were busy repairing the city wall and setting up spell formations on the mountain range. You want to stop the ancient invaders and the million-strong undead army with this wall? Vicky frowned. She did not see the so-called allied army. She did not even know if they really existed. Forget it. Let's go in and take a look. Vicky deactivated the autopilot mode. She slowly pushed the accelerator lever, and the spaceship suddenly sped up. It flew over the Gus Mountain range in an instant. Meg, who was observing the terrain on the mountain, seemed to have sensed something. He looked up at the sky. Although he did not see any traces of the spaceship, he felt something flying across the sky in that instant. With such speed and stealth, it had to be she. But why would she enter the ice field at this time? Was she planning to eliminate some of the undead army's forces for the Allied army before the war? Meg and she were now semi-allies. They had the same goal and shared the same information on dealing with Cthulhu. However, this was all based on the premise that she took the initiative to share. Meg could not ask her for more information. For example, he did not know where she was these few days, what she was doing, and why she suddenly appeared on the ice field and went deep into the ice field. Of course, with her battleship's performance, as long as she did not get too close to Cthulhu, it would not be a problem for her to wander around the ice field. At this thought, Meg looked at his old buddy, who was chewing on a bone at the side. Meg could not help but feel envious. Z was naturally a first-class mount. On the Norland continent, there should not be a mount that could fly faster than him, including giant dragons. As a 10th-tier magic beast, Ozzy's attack power was actually not strong due to its extreme speed. It was only at the level of spitting thunderballs. Meg was rather curious about She's purpose in entering the ice field. However, the ice field was not his home after all. It was not good to enter and leave casually. He still had to consider Cthulhu's feelings. If he was angered and summoned a million undead army to the south, then the Allied army would have to rush home and fight on their own. Being the head of the house was difficult. Meg walked around the mountain and took out a pen and paper to write and draw. According to the terrain, he had basically determined the style and location of the turrets. Next, he should make a trip back to Chaos City and bring the first batch of cannons to the front line. I still have to discuss with Jonas about the main cannon. I have to set up a protective spell formation for it. Meg kept the pen and paper and walked down the mountain. Right at this moment, he suddenly looked up and narrowed his eyes. Why is there another one? If the previous spaceship was She's, then whose was this one? Could it be that the Ancient One's reinforcements had arrived? In that case, he had to go and watch the show. Z. Meg whistled. Z turned its head and shook off the bone that it had been chewing on for a long time before flapping its wings and flying. This direction. Fly at full speed. Meg raised his hand and pointed in a direction as he ordered. Howl. Ozzy raised its head and howled. The runes on its wings flowed as it turned into a purple lightning bolt and plunged into the ice field, disappearing into the horizon. Chapter 2170. They hid pretty well. I finally found them. Vicky smiled as she looked at the tens of thousands of ancient corpses hidden in the canyon below. This is a battlefield from ancient times. All the races joined forces to fight the invaders here. They suffered heavy casualties and eventually sealed the invaders. I didn't expect their corpses to be used by the invaders to invade the Norland continent that they used to protect, another voice said. They are no longer the heroes that protected the Norland continent in the past. They are puppets controlled by the devil. If they knew about this, they would want us to destroy them. Vicky let the spaceship hover. opened the weapon compartment, and aimed at the ancient corpses in the canyon. But where is their controller? Vicky stared at the screen. The results of the radar scan were only small red dots in the canyon. There were no stronger life forms. The ancient invaders were feared by our ancestors. We had better be careful. Let's see how long they can hide. Vicky pressed the red button beside her hand. The 4 cannonballs that had been locked on were fired and flew towards the canyon below. They split open at a height of several hundred meters above the canyon and turned into hundreds of small bombs that fell into the canyon.
Boom, boom, boom.
Accompanied by a loud explosion, flames burst and a mushroom cloud rose slowly. The icebergs on both sides of the canyon collapsed in the explosion and almost filled up the entire canyon. Roar. Interesting. Vicky was a little excited. She stared at the reds that had disappeared on the screen and aimed at the place where the red dots were densely concentrated. The smoke and water vapor gradually dissipated, and the skeleton struggled to climb out from under the ice. After being attacked, the red light in their eyes became brighter. They were like beams of light looking for targets, and started to leave the canyon. The ancient corpses that had the ability to fly started to take off. Dozens of different ancient corpses flew into the sky and towards the battleship in the sky. Come on, you disgusting creatures. Vicky looked at the ancient corpses that were approaching quickly. There were even a few zombie dragons among them. She pressed the button to fire the cannonballs and pulled the handle to switch to the battleship's heavy machine gun. She aimed at the ancient corpses below and started a one-sided massacre. With a series of smooth gunshots, the zombie dragon's head was blown off, and half of its head was blown off. The flying magical beast skeleton was blown apart, and it disintegrated in midair. Vicky was in an invincible position against the undead army of 50,000. The bombs that were dropped earlier swept through the canyon once again, turning over 10,000 skeletons into dust. When we get back, you can write an opera about Miss Black Cat wiping out the Valley of the Dead. Vicky smiled as she looked at the fleeing skeletons. The undead army that was feared by all the races of the Norland continent was only SOSO. Come to think of it, the various races of the Norland continent were too weak. Their technology was also lacking. Not only did they not have battleships, they did not even have cannons. In this world, there were no skeletons that couldn't be taken care of by a cannon. If there is, then let's have another shot. The Black Cat battleship belonged to Vicky's grandfather. Vicky grew up on spaceships and became the youngest captain of the Ancients at the age of 8. Originally, she could only officially own this battleship when she was 18 and joined the Ancient One's defense army. But when she ran away from home 2 years ago, she secretly took the ship out. This was a quasi-battleship class spaceship. However, Vicky had modified it herself. Whether it was the power system or the weapon system, it was already at the level of a battleship. Also, there was an ample amount of ammunition. When she left home, she emptied half of the fleet's ammunition storage. But what is this button for? Vicky played with it for a while before her gaze landed on an eye-catching white button beside the screen. Self-destruct button. It's best not to press it unless it's an emergency, another gentle voice answered. Don't worry. I won't kill myself for fun, even if I'm fine. Vicky pressed down on the control stick and let the spaceship dive down. At the same time, she aimed the machine gun at the fleeing skeletons and started shooting. Those who were too weak were naturally not in her target range. Only those skeletons with even more dazzling red dots were qualified to take a bullet from her. The ice spheres that the skeletons threw couldn't even leave any obvious marks on the surface of the spaceship. This was a one-sided massacre. That guy, where is it hiding? Do you know what it looks like? Vicky scanned the surroundings, including the ice surface. What was strange was that after so long, the legendary ancient invader still hadn't appeared. Most of the ancient invaders are indescribable creatures. They have terrifying appearances. Some have the head of an octopus, and their gelatinous bodies can transform into any shape they wish. They even have giant bat wings on their backs, and some are illusory. Beep. Beep. Unknown object approaching rapidly. Danger. The spaceship suddenly issued a warning and quickly entered automatic evasive mode. As it fired the stun grenades, it accelerated and left.
Bang!
However, a dull sound of a collision was heard from above the spaceship. The spaceship was knocked down by the impact. Many warning signs appeared on the dial. Hull damaged. Air pressure dropping rapidly. Engine number 4 has stopped. Backup engine failed to start. Vicky hit her head on the control stick during the collision, and there was a red swelling in the middle of her head. Ugh, it hurts. Vicky held her forehead, and she was a little confused. Quickly pull the spaceship to the left. It's coming again. Another voice said anxiously.
What?
Vicky tried to grab the control stick. However, before she could react, the spaceship was hit violently again. Rip! An ear-piercing tearing sound was heard from above, and a large part of the top of the spaceship was torn off. The spaceship lost control and fell to the ground. 1500 m, 1200 m, 800 m. The alarm was loud, and the spaceship was getting lower and lower. The skeletons that were scattered began to gather in the area where the spaceship was falling. The corpses that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws seemed to be ready to enjoy a feast. Vicky was a little flustered, and she didn't know what to do. Let me do it. A gentle and helpless voice was heard. The fluster in Vicky's eyes disappeared, and it was as if she was a different person. She quickly pressed a few buttons, and 3 of the engines that had stopped, almost all of them, were restarted. She gripped the control stick with both hands and gritted her teeth as she pulled it up. Right before the spacecraft hit the ground, it swayed as it climbed up once again, sticking to the surface of the ice. The ancient corpses that jumped up even hung on the front of the spaceship and slapped the surface of the spaceship crazily. At this moment, Vicky finally saw the existence that was attacking them. A majestic frost dragon was suspended in midair, and it stared at them with its scarlet eyes. No pop-up windows. Chapter 2171. The gigantic frost dragon had a wingspan of more than 200 meters, and its claws were as sharp as swords. Its crystal-clear wings were like condensed frost, and its powerful aura made Vicky feel how small she was. It was the fear that came from the depths of her soul when the dragon looked down on her like an ant. Weren't there corpses everywhere? Why is there such a powerful dragon here? Vicky's voice was trembling slightly. It was this big guy that had attacked the fighter jet earlier. The Ancient One's best fighter jet had not been able to dodge automatically. Although the spaceship was temporarily under control, many of its engines had stopped, and the exterior of the cabin was severely damaged. It was impossible to escape at full speed. Fortunately, the weapon system was still operating normally. Vicky pulled out the weapon system without hesitation and aimed the electromagnetic cannon at the dragon. At the same time, homing missiles were fired, flying toward the frost dragon in a crisscross pattern.
Boom.
The electromagnetic cannon was successfully charged, and the shells flew out of the huge cannon barrel. The spaceship flew backward, trying to get away from the dragon. 5 cannonballs were enough to reduce everything in an area to nothingness. Even if it was not enough to deal with the dragon, it would at least increase her chances of escaping. The dragon was too powerful, so powerful that Vicky lost the determination to fight it. The spaceship was severely damaged, and she had to leave. Once she landed, she could not imagine the scene of thousands of ancient corpses pouncing on her. Then she saw something that shocked her. The shells that were flying toward the frost dragon seemed to have fallen into a swamp when they were within 500 meters of its body. Their speed decreased rapidly, and then all of them stopped. The 5 shells were suspended in midair, just like that. It's a domain. Vicky's heart skipped a beat. The powerful frost domain from the frost dragon, which was beyond grade 10, could freeze everything within range. Then, Vicky tapped on the screen and manually detonated the bombs.
Boom. Boom. Boom.
The bombs exploded one after another, annihilating the dragon. Vicky was delighted. She tried to reignite the engine that had stopped, and at the same time, She pushed the control stick and pulled the spaceship upward, intending to accelerate and escape. In front. Vicky looked up, and her expression changed drastically. A huge, indescribable object rose from the surface of the ice. The ice cracked, and like a mountain, it blocked the path of the spaceship. It was a jelly-like mountain of flesh covered in black scales, wriggling like a giant worm. It had a pair of giant bat wings that were thousands of meters tall. Black mucus flowed down its body, corroding the ice and blackening it. Vicky came to an emergency stop. Her face was pale as she looked at the indescribable thing in front of her. Immense fear filled her heart. This was clearly the legendary ancient invader. Only when one stood in front of it did they realize how insignificant they were, as well as the ridiculous words he had said earlier. The Ancient One. A low, ear-piercing voice rang out, carrying anger and mockery. Then, the mountain of flesh wriggled in the direction of the spaceship. It was as if a huge mountain of flesh had collapsed. It's not working.
Failed.
Power failure. Vicky tried to steer the spaceship away, but the spaceship's propulsion system failed. The spaceship plummeted and landed heavily on the ground. What do we do now? Vicky asked anxiously. Leave it to me again. You're better at spaceships, but I'm better than you when it comes to individual combat. Vicky jumped down from her seat, rushed into the weapons warehouse, and jumped into a mech. It was a 5-meter-tall black mech that completely covered her. It was equipped with a black sniper rifle and a black and red scimitar that was almost as tall as her. The huge barrel of the gun reflected a ghostly light. The scimitar that was made of super steel was enchanted by the most powerful mage of the Ancient One. Activate the spaceship's self-destruct program, Vicky ordered. The spaceship's cabin door opened, and the ejection system allowed the mech to fly out of the spaceship. Coupled with the mech's built-in propulsion system, it appeared thousands of meters away in the blink of an eye.
Boom.
With a loud bang, the spaceship that was crushed by Cthulhu self-destructed. Half of the fleet's arsenal and the spaceship's nuclear propulsion system exploded at the same time. Red flames exploded, and the terrifying explosion overturned Cthulhu. Its huge body disintegrated in the explosion. The aftershock swept through the remaining skeletons, and they turned into dust. The ice layer shattered, and everything melted and vaporized in the flames of the explosion. A mushroom cloud rose slowly. Vicky drove the mech away from the center of the explosion. However, even though she had escaped a few miles away, the aftershock of the explosion still overturned the mech, and it rolled a few times on the ice. Vicky pressed her hand against the ground to stabilize herself. She turned around and aimed her gun at the frost dragon that was swooping down, and pulled the trigger at the same time. A golden-red bullet spun out of the gun barrel, and the inscriptions engraved on it began to burn faster. The bullet pierced through the frost dragon's wing, and a huge bullet hole was created. Blood splattered in the air. Roar! The frost dragon roared and spat out a string of ice balls that fell toward Vicky. The ice balls landed and exploded, and the huge impact overturned the mech. Vicky drove the mech to dodge quickly, and after a forward roll, she half knelt on the ground. She raised her hand and fired 2 more shots at the frost dragon that was pulling up. But this time, the frost WYRM was prepared. The bullets brushed past its wings, leaving only 2 scratches that were neither deep nor shallow, not to mention hitting any of its vital points. At the same time, a furious roar came from the center of the explosion. A huge figure flapped its wings and slowly rose into the air. More than half of the indescribable thing's lower body disappeared, but it was reforming at a speed visible to the naked eye. The 1,000-meter-long bat wings were full of holes, but they were also repairing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although it did not have eyes, Vicky felt as if she was being stared at. She could even feel its anger that was almost tangible. This is not good. Vicky's expression was a little stiff. The frost dragon was already difficult enough to deal with, and they still could not kill the monster after sacrificing a battleship. It had become a terrifying threat, an ancient invader that could not be killed. The records in the ancient books were not lies. The mech was built for battle, and its escapability was limited. Moreover, the frost dragon was staring at her at a terrifying speed. She had almost no hope of escaping. Vicky's heart sank. She steered the mech away from Cthulhu while sniping at the frost dragon. She had already thought about it. Once she was in a desperate situation, she would detonate the mech. Even if it turned into ashes, she did not want to become the devil's puppet after death and then be killed here and there. Cthulhu's huge body rose into the air, and it flapped its huge bat wings and flew toward Vicky. It covered the sky and the sky changed color. Chapter 2172. The Ancient still has such a weapon of mass destruction? Why didn't she use it last time? Meg sat on the griffin's back and looked at the huge mushroom cloud rising in the distance. The tremors transmitted from the ground shook the ice layer hundreds of miles away. Meg felt that an explosion of this scale was quite compatible with the mushroom cloud. He had already determined that the second battleship that suddenly appeared today was the Ancient's reinforcements that she had invited. Moreover, this reinforcements also carried the Ancient's weapon of mass destruction and was ready to attack and kill Cthulhu. Speaking of which, the Ancient might have been passed down from ancient times and did not restrict themselves to the improvement of individual strength. They developed their technology without restraint and possessed high-end weapons like battleships. Encountering Cthulhu that had been sealed since ancient times again, they could look forward to seeing if they could kill it completely. Meg knew himself well. If he was at the center of the explosion, he would probably be vaporized on the spot. Z. Charge in that direction and speed up. Meg patted his old buddy. He wanted to see the result of this explosion personally. Whether Cthulhu was killed or seriously injured, it was very important information. Towards the Ancient Ones, he still maintained a respectful and distant attitude. If it was not related to real interests, he would not have complete trust. Damn it! Vicky's heart sank to the bottom. She raised her gun and shot 3 times at Cthulhu. However, the 2-meter-long wound did not even penetrate and was repaired in the blink of an eye. This huge guy had no weakness at all. A deep sense of helplessness made Vicky feel hopeless. She suddenly felt a little regretful. She shouldn't have come here so recklessly. It's been a long time since I tasted the Ancient. It's indeed the best to reminisce. A low and piercing voice rang out as Cthulhu leaned over and pounced at Vicky. Activate self-destruct program. Vicky held the joystick tightly with both hands and stared at the swooping Cthulhu. She felt a little sorry for her team members. She had just brought them hope, but she could not go back. A bright red countdown appeared on the screen, and the alarm became shrill. Vicky put away her big gun and took off the red machete, holding it with both hands. Live or die standing. This was her family's motto. Cthulhu's huge body cast the shadow of death as a chill enveloped her body. Vicky could almost see the dazzling light of the self-destruct. It was a pity that no one else could enjoy such a beautiful scenery. Swoosh! Swoosh! Just then, 2 cannonballs flew over and landed on Cthulhu's body and exploded. Cthulhu's half-recovered body was once again blasted into smithereens. The massive shockwave pushed its massive body back by hundreds of meters. What's this? Vicky's eyes lit up, and she subconsciously stopped the self-destruct program. The familiar fiery thunderbolt armor-piercing bullet. This was the standard cannonball of the Ancient. Vicky fell to the ground and shielded her chest from the aftermath of the explosion. As soon as he raised his head, he saw a gray battleship slowly appearing in the sky. All covers. Vicky's S. SSSSSSS. Be careful of that frost dragon. Vicky looked at the frost dragons dive toward the gray warship and said anxiously. Previously, she was ambushed by the frost dragons, which caused the warship to be damaged. Although she did not know who came to save her, if the warship was damaged again, they would all die here. The gray warship also accelerated and dived downward. Then it quickly rose from the left front. The frost dragon's claws swept across the side of the warship. Frost quickly condensed on the surface of the warship. Beautiful, Vicky praised in her heart. If she could have done that, she wouldn't have been shot down from the sky. However, this was not the time for her to sit back and watch. The mechanical arm pressed hard on the ground and the Vicky's mech bounced up and rushed toward the warship. The thrusters behind it spewed out blue flames as its speed was increased to the maximum. On the other side, Cthulhu, who was repelled, let out a roar. It recovered from its injuries and chased after the mech again. Although the gray warship's dive this time avoided the Frost Dragon's attack, it also missed the opportunity to retrieve the mech. The Frost Dragon changed its direction and rushed toward Vicky again. With a flap of its wings, countless icicles condensed out of thin air and turned into a rain of icicles that covered the warship. The gray warship's defense cannons were activated. Bullets poured out, and the icicles were broken. The area in front of them was instantly cleared. Instead of retreating, the warship moved forward and locked onto the Frost Dragon. The bullets formed a red line of fire in the air. Although the Frost Dragon dodged skillfully and had the help of the Frost Domain's defense, its body was soon injured. Dragon scales flew and blood splattered in the air. On the other hand, the Frost Dragon charged forward several times with the defense cannon's firepower, but the gray warship's ingenious flying skills avoided it. However, the icicles that exploded at close range still left big and small potholes on the warship. Mag saw such an exciting scene when he arrived at the scene. The gray warship was exchanging blows with the Frost Dragon in the air. It was dangerous. On the ground, a black mecha was sprinting. The flames that it spat out allowed it to cover 100 meters in a single step. It left an obvious trail on the ice. And behind the mecha, Cthulhu, whose lower body was blown off, flapped its huge bat wings and followed unhurriedly. Further away, a huge crater with a radius of a few thousand meters appeared on the ice field. All kinds of broken warship fragments were scattered around the crater. What's going on now? Meg's eyelids twitched. It was different from what he had imagined. Judging from that huge crater, the previous explosion was even more terrifying than he had imagined. After all, outside Chaos City, hundreds of 10th-tier powerhouses joined forces, but they didn't manage to make Cthulhu's head so miserable. But using a warship to sacrifice itself to Crassus? Was this ancient's way of fighting so simple and violent? Unfortunately, even such a powerful explosion couldn't kill Cthulhu. And judging from its body's continuous recovery, this kind of injury was still within its recovery range. This was most likely the reason why the ancestors of the past could only seal it after paying an unimaginable price. It was like this tens of thousands of years ago, and it was still the same now. Miss Shi, do you need help? Meg took out his walkie-talkie and called Shi. The mecha that was sprinting on the ground was already shrouded by Cthulhu's shadow. The 5-meter-tall Gundam was no different from an ant in the face of a 1,000-meter-tall monster. Chapter 2173. Vicky was in despair. The appearance of the gray battleship gave her a glimmer of hope, but the shadow cast by the behemoth behind her completely wiped out this glimmer of hope. The Frost Dragon was already difficult for the gray battleship to handle. If she wanted it to take the risk to save her, both of them would fall to their deaths. You should go. I can't leave. The mech slid on the ice for a while before coming to a stop. Vicky said calmly. She held the big gun in one hand and shot steadily and determinedly at one of Cthulhu's wings. She looked at the huge Cthulhu and her heart sank to the bottom. Vicky's identity was extremely noble, and she was one of the top aristocrats among the ancients. Regardless of her identity, as a clansman, Vicky would do anything to save her. However, Cthulhu was too powerful and had this powerful Frost Dragon as a servant. Since it stopped trying to get close to it, she even lost the chance to take the risk of descending. Once the spaceship was controlled by the Frost Domain, she would lose all control and end up in the same situation as Vicky. Without a spaceship, they would not be able to escape from Cthulhu's grasp in this vast ice field. At this moment, a familiar number was connected to the line, and that person's familiar voice was heard. "Miss She, do you need help?" She turned her head and saw the majestic purple-striped griffin not far away, as well as the man standing on its back. "Yes, I need you to help me stop this frost dragon. I'm going to save my clansmen," she replied calmly, without any pretense. Vicky, who was also on the line, was a little surprised. Was there another clansman here? She then looked up and saw the purple-striped griffin shimmering with purple-gold light under the sun. Compared to Cthulhu, it looked very delicate. However, in the next second, it turned into a bolt of purple lightning and crashed into the frost dragon. Vicky saw the small figure standing on the griffin, brandishing the long sword in his hand at the huge frost WIRM. A human? Isn't this too ridiculous? Vicky's mouth twitched. She then saw the frost domain that was almost solid being slashed apart by the sword. The frost dragon clashed with its dragon claws. A crisp sound rang out, as if metal and stone had struck each other. The frost WIRM was actually sent flying back 1,000 meters by the slash. The purple lightning reappeared where the frost WIRM had been. So strong. Vicky's mouth gaped open as she stared at the purple-striped griffin in astonishment. Regardless of whether it was the purple-striped griffin's terrifying speed in that instant or the human on the griffin's back that had slashed out with his sword, they had all subverted her imagination. She'd been on the Norland continent for more than a year, but she'd always kept a low profile. Apart from being deceived a few times, she hadn't had any conflicts with anyone. According to the records in the ancient books, the top power level on the Norland continent was 10th tier, and no one could break through to the god tier. But today, the frost dragon gave her the feeling that it was more powerful than a level 10 dragon, but it had yet to reach the divine level. As for the man standing on the back of the purple-striped griffin, he gave her the feeling that he was a god-level powerhouse, an existence on par with her grandfather. There's no time to hesitate. Prepare to connect. There's only one chance, she said coldly. The electromagnetic cannon charged and fired. The gray battleship descended vertically. The suspension cable was lowered, and it flew rapidly towards the mechas on the ground. Vicky snapped back to her senses. She pressed the trigger and fired all the bullets in her gun at Cthulhu. She turned and sprinted forward. Then, she activated the thrusters under her feet and leaped up. Dozens of enchanted bullets hit the same spot. In the end, they still penetrated Cthulhu's right wing. Its wings, which were already riddled with wounds, flapped, and its huge body made a turn in midair. The electromagnetic cannon then crashed into Cthulhu's huge body and then exploded. The explosion swept out. Even Meg and Rankster, who were far away, had to retreat to avoid the attack. A gray battleship rushed out amidst the flames. The mechas hanging below quickly retracted, and then the cargo hatch was closed. Rescue successful. Retreat, she said calmly. At the same time, she fired 2 cannonballs, one of which was aimed at the frost WIRM. Meg took out 2 wind runes and slapped them on the purple-striped griffin's wings as he ordered, "Ozzy, go south." The purple-striped griffin turned around without hesitation. It turned into a purple light and disappeared into the sky. Meg leaned against the griffin's back. He grabbed a protruding scale tightly with one hand and felt the cold wind blow past his face. Ozzy, who had the acceleration rune, was 2 times faster than his limit. Although it only lasted for a short 10 minutes, it had already brought him out of danger. They continued to head south for about half an hour. A gray battleship hovered in midair. "Thank you for your help." She dialed the walkie-talkie and said sincerely. If not for Meg's appearance today and decisive help, Vicky would not have been saved. "It's okay. As long as it's against Cthulhu, we are friends," Meg said with a smile. Although the Ancient One's actions were a little strange, they had indeed killed tens of thousands of undead army and seriously injured Cthulhu and Rankster. Cthulhu might be able to recover with its powerful recovery ability, but Rankster was not an Ancient One. The string of bullet holes left on his body had already caused his strength to decrease significantly. This was also the reason why he could defeat him with one strike earlier. This is the reward. The cargo hold of the battleship opened, and a black heavy cannon was slowly lowered to the ground. There were more than 10 boxes accompanying it. An equivalent exchange. Not bad. Meg nodded in satisfaction. He liked sensible girls like she.
Goodbye,
She said calmly. The gray battleship started and accelerated, disappearing into the sky. Meg got Oz to land. He used the space box that Jonas borrowed to put the main cannon and cannonballs in before continuing to flee south. As long as they were not out of the ice field, there was no such thing as safety. You're she? Vicky stood beside the mecha and looked at the woman who walked out of the cockpit in surprise. You recognize me? She looked at her with a calm expression, but there was a hint of surprise in her eyes. You're so famous. How can I not recognize you? You're the champion of the last PUBG competition and the record holder for headshots, marksman She. Vicky looked at She with starry eyes. And I also know that you know who I am. Vicky Roosevelt, the third daughter of the Roosevelt family and the record holder for the youngest captain of the Ancient Ones. She looked at Vicky calmly, with some confusion. So, I'm very confused. How did you crash? This. Vicky's expression turned awkward. Chapter 2174. Vicky was indeed an excellent captain. She was the record holder for being the youngest captain in history. Her family did not deliberately give her this title to flatter her. She was obsessed with warships when she was young and had an amazing talent in piloting them. Therefore, at the age of 8, she could already skillfully control a warship and complete a series of operations on her own to pass the captain's assessment. Of course, this monstrous achievement belonged to the gentle Vicky. If she was the one piloting the warship at the beginning of the battle, she would definitely be able to make the most correct response when the Frost Dragon appeared and safely get the warship out of danger. She felt a little regretful at the thought of this. The Black Cat was the best warship for the Ancient Ones. It was extremely expensive to build, and half a fleet's ammunition was used on it. What exploded on the ice field just now was not fireworks but money. That man from before. Who is he? Vicky changed the topic and looked at She. The man from before also saved her. As a person who would repay kindness, she needed to know his name first. Alex, she said. Alex. Vicky frowned and thought that the name sounded familiar. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. He's the dragon-slaying warrior, Alex. In the past year or so, Vicky had been traveling around the Norland continent, and the most legendary stories she had heard were all about the man named Alex. The emotional entanglement and story between him and the elven princess made her want to adapt it into an opera and had already written part of the script. She did not expect that, after going around in circles, she would be saved by Alex. It was a pity that it was not the usual hero saving the damsel in distress. Otherwise, Miss Black Cat intervened in Alex and Irina's relationship and caused them to part ways would be a hit. It's him. She nodded. Vicky collected her thoughts and looked at She before bowing solemnly. She then said, Thank you for saving me. I'll repay you when I return to the buried city. This is a letter of entrustment from Mr. Ferdinand. He asked me to bring you back to the underground city if I meet you. She raised her hand and showed him a letter of entrustment. At the bottom of the letter was the signature of Ferdinand Roosevelt. How could Grandpa do that? Vicky widened her eyes. She did not expect her grandfather to issue a commission. That's how you could find me so accurately. Vicky looked at She. Did Grandpa do something to the Black Cat? She said calmly, Every warship of the Ancient Ones is pre-installed with a positioning system so that they can still find the warship in the event of an accident. You should be aware of this.
This.
Vicky was a little. She knew, and that was why she had not activated the Black Cat in the past 2 years. But I can't go back now. I still have something important to do. Vicky looked at She and said seriously, There are still people who need me. They need me to help them achieve their dreams. She looked at Vicky and said after a moment of silence, "Once I'm done with my observation mission, you must return to the dungeon with me."
How long will that be?
"I'm not sure yet." Vicky lowered her head and looked at her toes, not saying a word. She knew that she was not discussing it with her, but informing her of the decision. The commission and her grandfather's signature was a military order. Norland Continent may look backward, but it's actually a very special place. The premise is that you have to get off the spaceship before you can understand this world better. I've been here for more than a year, and I still don't dare to say that I understand the world, but I'm surprised every day. Vicky looked up at She and said seriously. She was an indifferent observer on this spaceship. However, Vicky believed that she would not be able to return to this world for at least 3 to 5 years once she got off the spaceship and came into contact with the mortal world. She wanted to refute Vicky's statement, but the delicious braised pork was indeed beyond her imagination and understanding. It even appeared in her dreams for the past 2 days. Perhaps there are many other delicacies in this world, she thought to herself, but she said calmly, "The lounge is open. You can use it." "Thank you," Vicky said, and walked to the lounge. She really needed to calm down now. It did not feel good to be close to death, or rather, it was terrible. "Alex, I'll remember you." Vicky took off her combat uniform and slid into the bathtub. Meg returned to the command center and looked for Jonas to change the plan at the last minute. Looking at the miserable expression on old Cheong's face, Meg patted him on the shoulder and smiled like an old capitalist. The main cannon from the Ancient One was a killing machine against the undead army. Meg did not know who was piloting the crashed battleship just now, but he could not help but want to scold her for being a prodigal. The bomb that exploded just now was enough to wipe out half of the million-strong undead army, okay? What one had to do was to carefully find the gathering place of the undead army, drop a few bombs, and then slip away before Cthulhu appeared and appear at the next gathering point. However, this prodigal ran to Cthulhu and listened. Judging from the voice in the previous conversation channel, it should be a female captain. Judging from She's risky rescue, it was either an old acquaintance of hers or someone of high status. She was a cold-blooded animal. This was something that Meg was very sure of. What happened in the ice field earlier? Irina's voice came from behind. Explosion. A violent explosion. Meg turned to look at her and recounted what happened earlier in detail. "Didn't you say that she's the only Ancient One on the Norland continent?" Irina's beautiful brows furrowed. Perhaps she didn't understand the situation. Otherwise, she wouldn't have let that battleship launch a meaningless suicide attack and put herself in danger, Meg speculated. This was also what he was thinking on the way here earlier. That terrifyingly calm woman was not someone who would put herself in danger easily. Irina nodded slightly and said, "Lewis was looking for you earlier. The dragons intend to form a team and enter the ice field to clean up the skeleton army before the battle to reduce the pressure on the front line during the battle. There's no need to go. Cthulhu has moved all the undead army under the ice. We can't find the target at all. Instead, we'll become Cthulhu's prey." Meg shook his head. "The dragons are our core air attack force. If we suffer heavy losses before the battle, we won't be able to fight this battle."
"Oh, right.
"The people from Lantist are here. Dexter wants to see you," Irina said. Chapter 2175. In the Underground City. On the top floor of a 1,000-meter-tall building, a hale and hearty old man with short silver hair was sitting behind his desk, frowning as he looked at the documents on the virtual screen. "Sir." A man in a suit pushed the door open anxiously and anxiously said, "The Black Cat's signal has appeared." But what? The old man put away the virtual screen and stared at the secretary with a pair of sharp eyes. "But we had just finished locating it when the Black Cat self-destructed." The secretary's forehead was full of cold sweat, but he still quickly said, "This is the image sent back before the Black Cat self-destructed." Self-destruct. The old man's body swayed, and he reached out to support himself on the table. He could barely control his emotions as he looked at the image displayed on the virtual screen opened by the secretary. It was a huge squirming mountain of flesh, flapping its huge bat wings and pouncing towards the battleship. Then, there was a loud bang, and the image was engulfed in flames before it disappeared. It was only a short 10-second video, but it was still extremely terrifying. Cthulhu. Ferdinand clenched his fists, and the aura that erupted from his anger made the legs of the secretary at the side tremble. This was the second time he saw Sir Ferdinand so angry. The last time was when the third young master went missing near our Ela 200 years ago, and when he appeared again, he was already crazy. He knew why Sir was so angry. The Black Cat was the spaceship of Miss Vicky, whom Sir doted on the most. Miss secretly piloted the spaceship away from home 2 years ago. Sir Ferdinand had ordered a search for her for 2 years, and had been trying to track the Black Cat's signal. No one would have thought that after finally tracking the signal today, it would send back such a regretful self-destruct image. A headless Cthulhu was still Cthulhu. What kind of desperate situation would make Miss Vicky press the button to self-destruct? It was her most beloved Black Cat, the battleship that she named herself. Ferdinand stood up and said in a deep voice, "Gather the first fleet and follow me to the Norland continent." "Yes," the secretary replied respectfully, and turned to leave. "Sir." Just then, a young man rushed in with an excited expression. The secretary was slightly shocked. Sir was in a bad mood now, and couldn't help but worry that his subordinate's recklessness would anger Sir. "Miss Vicky. Miss Vicky is currently on Captain She's warship." The young man looked at Ferdinand and said,
"What?"
Ferdinand's eyes lit up. "You're saying that she saved Vicky? Is the news accurate?" The Secretary General was also shocked. They were so close to Cthulhu that Miss Vicky had no choice but to detonate the battleship. How could she bring Miss Vicky down? "Look, this is the image that Captain She just sent back." The young man turned on the virtual screen and played a video. The video started with a huge mushroom cloud rising from the ice field. This should be the video of the Black Cat's self-destruction. Then, the image zoomed in on the ice field, and a small mecha was being chased by Cthulhu. "It's Vicky." Ferdinand clenched his fists. This mecha was a gift from him to Vicky, and the black coating was painted by her personally. The mecha, which was more than 5 meters tall, was like an ant that could be trampled to death at any time in front of the huge Cthulhu. Then, she piloted the battleship and joined the battle, repelling Cthulhu with 4 shells. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief when they saw this. It seemed that she had successfully rescued Vicky with her excellent piloting skills. However, right at this moment, a frost dragon appeared and intercepted the battleship. The two began an extremely intense battle, and it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. What a powerful frost dragon! I didn't expect such a powerhouse to appear on the Norland continent in just a few hundred years. "It's a pity that it's controlled by Cthulhu," Ferdinand said in a low voice. To be able to engage in such an intense battle with a mecha at such a close distance, this frost dragon's ability was obviously above 10th tier, but it had not crossed that threshold. The battle back then had damaged the foundation of the Norland continent, and it was difficult for powerhouses to appear on the Norland continent. It was also because of this that the ancients left and entered the underground city to build a new world. However, with such a powerful enemy in the way, it was difficult to separate. The battle was intense, so how did she successfully rescue Vicky? Everyone could not help but wonder. On the other side, Cthulhu had already approached the mecha again. The situation was critical. Right at this moment, a purple lightning bolt appeared in the distant sky and arrived in front of them in the blink of an eye. After a short pause, the purple lightning bolt charged towards the frost dragon. The battleship piloted by She was able to escape. While firing the missiles, it dove towards the mecha on the ground. The purple lightning bolt crashed into the frost dragon at an astonishing speed, and the powerful frost dragon was sent flying. Everyone then saw that the purple lightning bolt was actually a purple-striped griffin, and on the griffin's back stood a man holding a heavy sword. The frost dragon was sent flying by his sword. So powerful. The Secretary General could not help but exclaim. The young man's mouth was also agape. This person is already half a step into the godly realm. Unbelievable. Ferdinand's shock was no less than the two of them. To enter the godly realm on the Norland continent, this young man's talent was really impressive. While the Frost Dragon was distracted, she finally found an opportunity to dock with the mecha and escape with the mecha. The scene ended there. Great. Great. Ferdinand paced around the office, unable to hide his joy. The great joy and sorrow came too suddenly, and he could not handle it. This young man is great. If there's a chance, I must meet him. Ferdinand sat back down with a smile. Sir, the First Fleet, the Secretary General asked carefully. There's no hurry. I have to wait for Xi's report. Ferdinand raised his hand and looked at the Secretary General. What's the situation at our Ila? The miasma has been spreading in our Ila for the past few days, and no one can go within a 5-kilometer radius to check the situation inside. However, from the observation of the outside, there's no other abnormal situation, the Secretary General answered quickly. Ferdinand's knuckles tapped on the table lightly, and he suddenly stopped. He said in a deep voice, let the 2nd Artillery Regiment go to our Ila and be on standby. Meg soon met Dexter and Gina. Gina bowed slightly to Meg before leaving the room. It's been a long journey, Meg said to Dexter. The warriors of the Lantis tribe came all the way north from the southernmost tip of the Norland continent and were the first to reach the front line. The war is urgent, and I dare not delay, Dexter said with a smile. Meg nodded and said, I have already asked the dwarves to forge the peachwood weapons for Rankstow. You can rest at the front line for the next few days. Of course, if there are suitable magic casters, they can also help to build the fortifications. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.